I'll get right to the point. My middle son is a senior in college. He's a good kid, most of the time. I'm a bit cross with him right now, because he just asked me for money for a spring break trip to Hawaii with his friends, which kind of caught me off guard. Like I said, he's a good kid, and I want him to enjoy himself, but something about the way he asked rubbed me the wrong way. His mother's been struggling with her mental health lately, and it would have meant a lot to her to have him around, but I guess he's more preoccupied with getting wasted on a beach with his frat brothers. I can't even say I blame him for it. I was exactly the same when I was his age, and I see a lot of myself in that kid. The whole thing actually got me reminiscing about my own college days and reminded me about something I haven't thought about in a very long time, which is the story I'm about to tell. Funnily enough, my son is the one who introduced me to this page, so maybe he'll get a kick out of this if it gets read. I went to Wharton, class of '85, something I'm still damn proud of. It was and still is the most prestigious business school in the world, and I took that reputation seriously. I had my fun, but I also worked like hell. It was a different time back then. A lot of my classmates were crazy, like Wolf of Wall Street crazy, and I did my best to avoid getting swept up into that life. My junior year, though, I did something a little impulsive. I was dating a Puerto Rican girl named Maria Munez, who I remember fondly. Sometimes I try to imagine how different my life would have been if I had chosen to take things further with various girlfriends I had, her being one of them. Instead of going home for spring break like I usually did, Maria convinced me to come home to Puerto Rico to meet her extended family. It was my first time on the island, and I was eager to impress her, so I agreed without hesitation. That being said, I was a nervous wreck. I didn't want to mess anything up, and Maria often joked about how open Puerto Rican families were, so I was aware that they already knew a lot about me. It turned out that my anxiety was mostly unjustified, as I got along really well with everyone upon meeting them, and it seemed like they really liked me. Most of the trip was about meeting her relatives, but we did have time for a few outings of our own. I mean, it was spring break after all. One of those outings was a hike through El Janqué, which, fun fact, is the only tropical rainforest in the US National Forest System. Neither of us had a car, obviously, so Maria's mother drove us and dropped us off at one of the most popular trailheads. The two of us were pretty devious, so we definitely took advantage of the fact that neither of us had to drive. The plan was to hike, enjoy the scenery, and sneak a little rum we'd packed. Everything was lining up to be perfect, but we quickly realized there was a big problem. The trail we were most excited about was closed. I don't remember why, flooding, maintenance, something like that, but all I remember was that Maria was really upset. I tried to calm her down and told her we could just hike one of the many other trails the forest had to offer. She wasn't budging though, and told me that the trail we planned on hiking was like the premier trail, and the other ones didn't even come close. How one hiking trail could be astronomically better than the other, I really couldn't tell you. She was adamant though, and I had long since learned the dangers of arguing with her over something like this. So I asked her what she wanted to do instead, and she told me we should just hike the closed trail anyway. Like I said, I was kind of rebellious back then, and so was she. So when she proposed that idea, I was on board. We'd come all this way, and now some rule was going to stop us? No chance. She gave me a look, and that was all it took. We made sure there was no one around, slipped past the barriers, and started up the trail, laughing like a couple of idiots. At first, it was exactly what we wanted. Better even. It felt like we had the whole forest to ourselves, which was especially awesome given how popular this trail would have been otherwise. Imagine visiting a world-famous natural site, except you're the only one there. That kind of exclusivity is impossible to come by. Anyway, we hiked for a decent while, passing little waterfalls and admiring the beauty of the forest. And yes, we were also drinking. Not excessively, but just enough to feel a good buzz. It was really fun, I have to be honest. But then, out of nowhere, Maria screamed and jumped back, almost knocking me over. That instantly put me on high alert, although I didn't know what had scared her. I looked around frantically until I saw it. A little further down the path was what looked like a freshly decapitated mongoose. Let me repeat that, it was a mongoose. A big one too, and its head looked like it was completely missing. I told Maria to stay where she was and approached the carcass by myself, hoping it was maybe a stuffed animal or something. It wasn't. I inspected it without getting too close and confirmed what I initially thought. Its head was cleanly sliced off. The cut was too precise for it to have been anything other than a knife wound, which was downright disturbing. The worst part, though, was that the body hadn't started smelling yet, meaning it probably hadn't been there for very long. Maria was shaking. I was mostly shocked by it. I tried to reassure her by saying something dumb like how crime in a national forest was unlikely, even though I couldn't explain it myself. I put my arm around her and ushered her past the body, trying to block it from the line of sight. All I could think about in that moment was putting some serious distance between us and that poor lifeless creature. We walked in silence for a while, and even though we distanced ourselves from the mongoose, I could tell the moment was gone. The adrenaline rush had worn off my buzz and erased my good mood. As bad as I felt, though, I could tell that Maria was significantly more shaken, and I couldn't imagine that she was even enjoying herself in the slightest. She said that she wanted to stick to our original plan of hiking the whole trail to the other side, but it was obvious that she didn't want to be in that forest anymore, and I couldn't blame her. As we were walking, I couldn't help but rack my brain trying to figure out what we had stumbled upon. It didn't make any sense. I wasn't aware of the hunting laws there, but I couldn't imagine that hunting in a national forest so close to a pedestrian trail could be legal. And yet, that was the only explanation I could think of. Why they had left that mongoose's body there to rot was beyond me, but there was no other rational explanation. Maybe it was a hunter who had seized upon the opportunity to have that part of the forest all to himself, like we had. I really didn't know. Maria and I hiked another mile or so, with me trying to cheer her up the whole time, but nothing was working. Eventually, she admitted that she wasn't feeling well and wanted to turn back. I didn't argue, although I was definitely dreading having to walk past that spot again, mostly because I wasn't sure how it was going to affect her, and I just wanted her to feel comfortable. We retraced our steps, and I could tell we were closing in on the spot where the mongoose had been. I told Maria to keep her head down so she wouldn't see, and she did. I braced myself as we turned the final bend, but when the spot came into view, the mongoose was no longer there. Someone had moved it. My heartbeat started racing, and I instantly began scanning nearby trees, terrified that there was someone hiding among them. I was not prepared for what came next. Instead of seeing a person, I noticed something hanging from one of the trees. It was a mongoose. It was strung up with twine, its paws tied together. There was a sickly green liquid dripping from its body that hadn't been there before, and it was rotating slowly in the wind. I couldn't help but curse out loud when I saw it, which caused Maria to open her eyes. As soon as she saw it, she let out an awful, blood-curdling scream of pure terror. Before she could freeze up, I grabbed her wrist and told her to run. We took off sprinting down the trail, trying not to trip over each other. I let her go in front of me and kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting someone to be following us. Instead, a deafening scream rang out from somewhere behind us. It was a woman's scream, and it was absolutely terrifying. It sounded like the kind of scream someone getting attacked would make. I felt Maria's body jolt mid-stride, and for a second, I thought she was going to collapse. She let out this panicked sob and tried to push herself even harder, but she was already out of breath. I kept my grip on her wrist, practically dragging her along as she slowed down. We couldn't stop. My own chest was burning, but we needed to keep moving. Eventually, Maria could barely run anymore, so we had no choice but to slow down to a fast walk. I turned around completely and started walking backward, keeping my eyes locked on the trail behind us. I was bracing myself for a fight. Something had strung up that mongoose. Something had caused that scream. I was 100% sure that I'd see something charging towards us any second, but nothing ever happened. The trailhead finally came into view, and for a brief second, I thought we were in the clear. But then I saw someone standing near the barricades watching us. It was a park worker with his arms crossed, clearly pissed off. As soon as we slipped past the barricades, he started yelling at us about breaking the rules and told us he was kicking us out and banning us for life. But then he got a good look at Maria, who at that point was both sobbing and physically exhausted. I told the guy everything, not leaving a single detail out. He took it really seriously. He told us we both needed to come with him, so we did. We were taken to a small ranger station near the parking lot where a supervisor was waiting. I had to go through the story again, then again when they called the police. Maria didn't say a word. Eventually, her mother arrived and we left, still shaken. I never heard anything about what the authorities found, or if they even bothered investigating. I'm sure Maria's family might have heard something, but we broke up the following summer, and we fell out of contact after that, so I really wouldn't know. I haven't thought about this experience in a long time, but it's still just as unsettling as it was all those years ago. I think the worst part about the whole thing was that scream, because we never saw anyone else on that trail, and I have no idea who it belonged to. I'd consider myself a pretty laid-back guy. I'd say the same about most of my friends. This happened last year, so I'll get right into it. Spring break was supposed to be just me and my friends Jackson, Ariel, and Isabel camping on a secluded beach in Alabama. No crowds, just stars and waves. We got there late, later than we planned. We parked in the closest lot and began walking toward the beach. The place was dead quiet. No other campers, no fishermen, nothing but empty sand stretching for miles. According to Isabel, who was familiar with the area, locals sometimes use that part of the beach for overnight fishing, but that night it was empty. It wasn't fully dark out yet, but the sun had started setting, so we'd need to set up camp quickly. Jackson and I began pitching the tents. Since I had driven, I had brought my dog Bean with me. He was a Doberman who loved the sand, so we all got a kick out of watching him run and roll around. At one point, Ariel pointed out a car in the distance, saying it had driven by twice already. I turned. An old, beat-up looking SUV slowly rolled past on the narrow access road that ran parallel to the dunes. The access road was a little more than a strip of packed sand, just wide enough for one car. On one side was the beach where we were, and the other side was a line of shrubs. You couldn't really see the main roads from where we were. The car drove by and ultimately disappeared down the road. The four of us shrugged it off and went back to setting up, and by the time we finished, we decided to crack a few beers and chop it up in a circle. The girls drank seltzers instead of beer, which we made fun of them for. It was almost fully dark at that point. I can't remember who noticed it first, but that car that had driven by was back again. Only this time, it stopped when it was parallel to us. The driver's door opened and a man got out. I could tell it was a man because he was really tall, although I couldn't make out any features of his face. He began walking towards us, and the girls got nervous. Jackson and I told them not to worry, and we got up to go intercept the man before he could reach our campsite. Bean was already on high alert, so I told him to come with us. As we got closer, I started to notice that he was walking oddly. There was this slight limp in his walk, and he almost stumbled a few times. When we got close enough, Jackson said, "How's it going, man?" trying to keep things light. The guy didn't waste any time. He immediately said, "You're on my property." He slurred his words a bit, and I figured he was a little drunk. I told him we thought the beach was public land. Keep in mind, it was really unlikely that some dude owned the beach. There were no private signs anyway. After I said that, the guy didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a knife. Bean started growling in response to the man's body language, which honestly should have scared the guy off given how scary Dobermans look. But he didn't budge. Instead, he started running towards us with his knife outstretched. Bean charged at him and jumped to attack his arm that was holding the knife, causing him to fall to the ground. I yelled no at the top of my lungs as I didn't want my dog to get stabbed, but Bean somehow got the dude to drop the knife. The man screamed in pain as Bean bit his arm. I whistled for him to get off, and he listened to me. He ran back to my side, but kept his eyes on the guy who was now writhing in pain on the ground. Eventually, the guy got up and started running back towards his car. Jackson and I ran back to the girls, telling them everything. By the time we finished, that SUV had driven off. The girls wanted to pack up and carry everything back to the car, but there was a part of me that was nervous about that plan. That guy was unhinged. There was no telling what he'd do, and I wasn't keen on walking in darkness with my hands full. Isabel made a good point though, saying that he might return with a gun or something. I told Ariel to call the police and tell them where we were and what happened. Once the police were close by, the four of us started walking towards the parking lot with our stuff. Bean was on high alert, and I have to admit the only reason I felt even remotely safe was because of him. I noticed lights up ahead near my car, and I was relieved. The officer stepped out to take our statements, and I was not ready for what happened next. He quickly pointed out my car's tires were slashed, and I was horrified to find out they were. The officer unholstered his weapon and told me to unlock the car, which I did. He opened my trunk, but thank God it was a false alarm. The officer was nice enough to help me with my tire situation. Thank God we brought Bean with us that night. That guy was probably a drunken lunatic. It could have probably been a quadruple murder if he had gotten his way. Finding a nice secluded place to hang out is definitely an awesome time, but it obviously comes with its risks. It was spring break 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Miami for a weekend. It was both of our first times in Miami. We were both 22. We stayed at some full house rental in Wynwood, which was like a 20-minute Uber from the beach. We got there on Thursday and we were staying until Monday. We landed pretty late in the day Thursday, so we just went out to some nearby bars for the first night. It was fun. The following day, we Ubered to Miami Beach to have a beach day. We brought the towels from the rental and just laid on the beach for hours. Multiple groups of guys approached us and we just reject them or whatever. But there was one guy who approached us, I guess specifically me, that just had this really charming accent, seemingly nice forward personality, and honestly everything about him was handsome, from his hair down to his physique. He introduced himself as Will. He asked what our plans for the night were and asked for my number, and honestly I gave it to him. Then he was off on his way down the beach. He didn't seem to be with anyone. We watched to see if he'd stop and try to get more numbers, but he didn't. He was just walking away looking at his phone, and eventually walked off the beach in the direction of the street. Michelle was a little jealous that he showed me more attention, I could tell. Later that day, after the beach and some bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too crazy for us. Definitely because it was spring break, but it was just a bit much. We returned to the rental with some drinks and snacks from a nearby store. We drank in the backyard by the pool, listening to music on Michelle's speaker while we plotted our night. It was around this time I shot Will a text asking what he was doing for the night. He responded very quickly, saying he and his friend didn't have plans yet, and then he suggested the four of us go out by us in Wynwood. Michelle jokingly asked if the friend was cute, but I wasn't going to ask that. We made a plan for Will and his friend to come pregame with us at the rental, so they came around 8. The friend's name was Ken, and he was surprisingly good looking as well. I could tell Michelle was pleasantly surprised. They brought their own drinks and left them on the counter in the kitchen, and we drank in the yard for like an hour. They seemed very normal. All seemed like it was going well. We eventually walked to a nearby bar. It was also in Wynwood. I have to admit, Michelle and I were already drunk, and Ken and Will kept buying rounds of shots. Things became a blur pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I blacked out, but bits and pieces of my memory became foggy at that point. Eventually, Michelle and Ken went to another side of the bar, presumably to hook up, so I was alone with Will for quite some time. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom, but before I left, I remember him calling out, "What do I want for my next drink?" I replied back, "A tequila soda." When I came back out from the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Will was like hovering over the corner of the bar, clearly doing something sketchy. I walked a certain direction to get a better angle, and I saw he had the 2 drinks in front of him, but he was hovered over them as if he were doing something to my drink. I may have been drunk, but that was enough for my intuition to tell me to leave. I walked away without him noticing to the other side of the bar, looking for Michelle, but she and Ken were gone apparently. So I rushed out of the bar and tried calling her a bunch of times, but she never picked up. Around this time, Will texted me asking where I went. I ignored it. I texted Michelle a bunch of times, asking what happened, where is she? And then I eventually dropped the bomb that I think Will was trying to roofie me and that we should get away from these guys. I started walking back to the Airbnb. This was when Michelle texted back, asking, "Why do you think he was roofieing you?" And I said because he was hovering over the drink he ordered for me, doing something to it. She texted back maybe he was just on his phone. I tried calling her, but again, she didn't pick up. She texted back instead, saying, "I'm still with Ken, just text." I responded to her that I already left, so I'm not going back anyway, and I suggested she meet me at the Airbnb. She responded, "I'll be back soon." So I walked back. When I got back, I let myself in with the code lock. The door automatically locked after like 10 seconds. Same thing with the back door. I sat, really drunk and by myself, honestly worried about Michelle, but also I feel like I was wondering if I was just overthinking the whole roofies thing. Maybe he was just on his phone. Either way, it was too late now. I was surprised that Will never attempted to text or call me again. Next thing I remember was the doorknob to the back door jiggling, and then I heard the button sound effects of the code lock, followed by a failed attempt sound effect. I then got a text from Michelle saying to open the back door. I went to the back door and called Michelle's name through the door. She didn't answer though. So I tried calling her phone, but she didn't pick up. I got a text back saying, "Hurry, open the door, he's coming." And this was when I really started to freak out. I yelled through the door, "Michelle, you're scaring me." There was no peephole or windows to look through to see if it was really her. I begged her to please answer me. She never did. There was a peephole in the front door, so I hurried to the front and looked through it. I actually felt sick at this moment, scared for my life, because I saw what looked like Will hiding to the side of the front door. A million thoughts crossed my mind, like if Michelle was running from Will. I was still too terrified to open the back door without her confirming it was her. I texted her back that I'm calling 911 right now. She didn't respond. I actually did call 911 and explained, and while I was on the phone, I checked the peephole again, and Will was gone. When police showed up, I let them in, and within 5 minutes, one of them asked if my friend was blonde, and I said yes. He then told me that another officer had her in their squad car and was bringing her here. I was so relieved, but also horrified. When she arrived in a second police car, she had been visibly crying. She was very, very drunk. To the best of her ability, she explained that she had her phone stolen and she was lost wandering the streets for an hour until someone helped her call the police. All of the texts I got from her number were never her. It was that guy she was with, Ken, or whatever his real name was. We also found her phone thrown in the pool in the backyard. They clearly took off the second I mentioned the police. We had to make a police report giving every last detail as specifically as possible. They said they'd get the surveillance footage from the bar we went to. We also had to contact the Airbnb host and immediately cancel our stay and go somewhere else. It was a long, nightmarish night. Obviously, the rest of our trip was completely spoiled. It took a whole week before hearing back anything from the police, and the only reason they called was to confirm what the name that guy that I was texting gave me, because it didn't align with the phone records for that number, which I'd already figured out myself. He was using another stolen phone. After that, I never heard from the police again, which is absolutely sickening how little priority the police put into cases like this, even with easy evidence. I have no interest in returning to Miami after this horrible experience. I could have honestly been killed. My name is Anna. My friend Lena and I had been looking forward to spring break for weeks. We were two broke college juniors desperate for a change of scenery, but neither of us could afford the classic trip to Mexico or Hawaii, so we were kind of restricted to somewhere in the continental US, preferably not too far away. So when we found a cheap Airbnb near Charleston's historic district, we booked it immediately. 5 nights of food, bars, and exploring. It felt like exactly what we needed. Plus, it was my first spring break above the age of 21, so I wouldn't have to constantly stress about which places were likely to snatch my fake ID. By the 3rd night, we'd settled into a routine. Sightseeing during the day, hopping between restaurants and bars in the evening. I'm not a heavy drinker, and neither is Lena, so we were getting more enjoyment out of just experiencing what the city had to offer. Early that evening, we ended up at this tiny seafood spot we had found online. Fried shrimp, hush puppies, sweet tea, you know, that sort of vibe. The place honestly felt like a hidden gem, and I was impressed that Lena had been able to sift through all the touristy stuff to find something a bit more authentic. The good vibe didn't last though. We were halfway through our late lunch when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a number I didn't recognize. The message just said, "Hey." I stared at it for a few seconds before showing Lena, asking her if she knew the number. She looked at my phone and said she didn't. I figured it was just a scam or something, but usually those scam texts say more than just "hey." Maybe it was a wrong number. I typed back a quick "who is this?" and went back to eating. Lena and I were laughing about something silly when another text from that same number popped up on my phone. It said, "Look outside." That one made me pause. I glanced toward the window next to our table, expecting to see someone waving or messing with me. Maybe one of my friends from school had coincidentally taken a trip to Charleston at the same time we had. But there was nothing, just the street with people walking by like normal. I told Lena someone was messing with me, and she agreed, saying it was probably just a prank. I laughed, but the thought of that really creeped me out. None of my friends were really the type to do that, but I guessed it could have been some guy who had previously hit on me and was bored or something. Up until that point, the whole thing still felt harmless, but then another message came through, just a few minutes later. It said one word, "Anna." That stopped me cold. If this person knew my name, it definitely wasn't a wrong number. Probably not a scam either. I gasped and showed Lena, and she reminded me about something I had completely forgotten about. On our first day in Charleston, Lena and I had entered one of those giveaways at a local cafe. It was one of those win a free meal promotions where they ask for your name and number and a few other things. It had completely slipped my mind, but as soon as Lena brought it up, that's all I could think about. I hadn't given my number to anyone in Charleston either, so it made sense. I told Lena whoever was texting me probably had her number as well, and the two of us kind of freaked each other out. Dinner wasn't as fun after that. In all honesty, I felt too out in the open. We paid the bill and decided to shake it off at a rooftop bar across town. It was packed and seemed like the type of place that attracted a younger crowd, so it was a no-brainer. After a few drinks, I was starting to loosen up, and Lena and I were enjoying ourselves again. But of course, that didn't last long. I got another message from that number, but this one was so much worse. It said, "That's a nice red jacket." I went stiff. I was wearing a red jacket. In fact, I was one of the only people there who was even wearing red. I looked around frantically, but it was useless. The place was crowded, filled with people laughing and drinking, but no one was looking at me. At least, not obviously. I showed Lena the message, and she said we should leave. The two of us started making our way back to the Airbnb as cautiously as possible. I kept glancing around behind us to make sure we weren't being followed, and we weren't. By the time we got inside, I bolted the door and double-checked every lock. We shut the curtains and locked all the windows too, trying to convince ourselves we were just overreacting. But an hour after we got back to the Airbnb, we started getting hungry, but neither of us wanted to leave. We ordered Uber Eats instead, picking some random burger place a few blocks away. I always had my Uber Eats setting set to leave at door by default, as I had a really bad experience with a delivery driver a while back that I don't want to talk about. The estimated wait time was 50 minutes, which felt like forever. We distracted ourselves by watching some dumb reality show, trying to shake off the lingering paranoia from earlier. For a little while, it worked. Eventually, there was a knock at the door. I looked down at my phone and saw a notification from Uber Eats saying the driver was arriving. I was confused though. Normally, Uber Eats would send a photo when the food was dropped off, so I wasn't too sure why our driver had knocked on the door. I looked at Lena, and she looked equally confused. I got up and checked the peephole, and yeah, it was a random, bulky-looking dude in a hoodie holding our bag of food. He just looked like a normal Uber Eats driver. I watched for a few moments, expecting him to set our food down and leave, but he just stood there. After a while, he knocked on the door again and said out loud, "Uber Eats for Anna." I said thank you and that he could just leave it out there, but he still didn't move. There was a long pause, and then he finally said I needed to come out and sign something real quick. That wasn't right. I exchanged a knowing glance with Lena. Something was very wrong about this. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911, mouthing, "just in case," to me. I wasn't gonna argue. Looking back, speaking out loud to that guy probably wasn't a smart choice, because after that, he started knocking on the door more aggressively. He kept saying that he had other deliveries to make and that he just needed a quick signature, but I knew that was BS. When I didn't respond, he started jiggling the doorknob. When it didn't budge, he started banging on the door, shouting my name. I honestly thought he was going to kick the door down, and I don't think Lena and I would have been able to fend him off had he done so. But then I heard a siren in the distance, and the banging on the door stopped. I heard the bag of food fall to the porch, followed by rapid footsteps running away from the house. There was quite the commotion on our yard. We heard officers yelling and sirens blaring. Lena and I rushed to one of the windows just in time to see two officers tackling that guy in the hoodie a few houses over. We didn't dare go outside, but we watched as they put him in cuffs and escorted him to the back of one of their cars. The officers then came to our house and we told them everything, including the text I had been receiving. By some miracle, one of the officers had been patrolling just 2 blocks from our Airbnb when Lena placed the call, which explained how they showed up so quickly. Thankfully, we were in a very happening area. They took our statements and told us we'd be hearing from them soon. It turned out our cafe theory was spot on. He worked there. He had taken photos of the giveaway forms and had been following us since that afternoon, probably because we had written down that we were just visiting for spring break, and that made us easy targets or something. The cops' running theory was that he had followed us home from the bar and waited outside our house. When the Uber Eats driver pulled up, he must have convinced him to hand over the food, maybe pretending to be my boyfriend or something. The guy also apparently had a criminal record, which made the situation even worse. We were dealing with someone with a very violent history, and that was downright terrifying. The rest of the trip kind of sucked, and when it got time to leave Charleston, I was relieved. I still don't know what that guy's plan was. Maybe he thought if we opened the door, he could push his way in and do God knows what. Either way, I tried not to think about what would have happened if Lena hadn't called the police when she did, or even worse, if the police hadn't been able to get there in time. It was about 4 in the morning one Saturday, and I was driving to work down the interstate. I was in the middle lane moving pretty quickly because I was already running a bit late to work that morning. So when I noticed a car in my left mirror catching me pretty quickly, I was almost alarmed. I had to already be going like 75 to 80, so he had to be going anywhere from 90 to 100. The car quickly caught up to me. It was a gray Honda Accord coupe. I took a look into the car, curious to see who was behind the wheel. Even though it was still dark out, I could see the driver looking back at me as he passed. Then I noticed someone in the back seat too. It was a young woman who appeared to be banging on the back window. Initially I didn't understand. I assumed it was a girl messing with me or whatever. It's usually not a person's first instinct to assume something sinister is going on, but when I saw the driver apparently push her down under the window and the car swerve at the same time, then I knew something was wrong. That woman was trying to get someone's attention and call for help. I started to speed up a little bit and got behind them so I could keep up. I could see the driver continuously reach into the back of the car with a swinging motion. He looked to be hitting her. I could see her arms flailing in the back of the car. I was in complete shock. I was actually witnessing a kidnapping right in front of me. As I was behind them, matching their speed of about 95 miles per hour, I took out my phone and called 911. As I was on the phone, the car in front of me's brake lights lit up and he started to slow down to a gradual stop. He definitely noticed that I saw what was going on and thought that I was following him. As much as I wanted to save that woman's life, I didn't know if the driver was armed with a gun or not, so I pulled around him and floored it. I wanted to keep behind them though, so I pulled off the next exit, but didn't go entirely up the exit ramp. I waited for the car to pass by down the highway, then I drove over the grass and back onto the highway and began to floor it to catch up to the car, all while still talking to 911, telling them where we were, what kind of car they were in, and how fast we were going. I was easily going 90 again to catch up to them. As I caught up to the car again, going at insane speed, he noticed me again even before I got too close. He started to brake in front of me again. I tried to go around him, but he cut me off. I had to stop. He got out from his car and started running towards my car with something in his hand. And in a panic, I threw the car in reverse until he stopped chasing me. Then I put it back in drive before he could get back in his car, and I drove quickly past him. The 911 operator told me there was a state trooper not far ahead from our location, and to just keep driving until I passed him. The man in the car behind me continued to follow me, both of us still going at an insane 90 miles per hour plus. I felt the weight of 1,000,000 pounds released off my shoulders when the flashing blue and red lights appeared in my rearview mirror behind the car chasing me. With me in front of him and the cop behind him, he didn't have much maneuverability, and he quickly pulled over onto the grass. I pulled over in front of him, but with at least 2 cars worth of space between us, because I still didn't know how this was about to go down. Luckily, the cop with his gun drawn got the guy out of the car with his hands up. By then, I got out and watched the whole thing. He was on the ground in cuffs now, laying on his stomach. Another police car showed up, and another cop entered the scene. The woman in the back of the car was let out. She was badly beaten, in tears, and extremely ecstatic to be saved, as she kept praising me for saving her life. The driver of the car was her ex-boyfriend, who had come to her house, and when she refused to talk to him, he attacked her, grabbed her, and threw her in the back of his car, which had the child locks on. It's scary to think where he might have been taking her, or what he was planning to do to her, if I or anybody else didn't witness her screaming for help in the back of the car. I made a trip to visit Boston to support a family member who was running in the Boston Marathon. I was driving from Chicago to Massachusetts and had to take Route 20, possibly the longest highway in the United States. I don't much like flying, so I decided to start driving around 3 p.m. after work. My GPS was telling me it would be a 15-hour drive, so knowing how I drove, it would probably be 14 hours. My ETA was telling me 6 a.m. I was expecting 5 a.m. if I didn't stop. I'm the type who doesn't like to make many stops on long car rides. I like to just bang out the whole ride in one go. Most of Route 20 is open land, and there isn't a whole lot of traffic in a lot of it. I'd say 10 hours in, around 1 a.m., I was basically one of the only cars on the highway. I had music blasting to keep me awake. I was comparatively almost done. Not really, but I was optimistic. I was starting to get slightly tired though, even after the 2 cups of coffee I drank. I didn't want to pull off for more coffee though, so I tanked through it. It would make finally collapsing into a bed when I'd get there all the more rewarding. One moment I was the only car in sight, then next thing I knew, there were headlights in my rearview mirror. I was in the left lane and he was kind of on my ass, so I switched to the right lane. He sped up a bit, passed by me, then for some reason slowed to match my speed just as my front bumper aligned with his rear bumper. Then he just matched my speed for the longest time. I started to speed up to pass him. As soon as I got in front of him, he turned into my lane behind me, so close it almost looked like he was going to clip my car. I had no choice but to speed up even more to get him off my ass. I wasn't looking to be the victim of a road rage incident, not at this hour especially. As I sped up, so did he. I switched into the left lane, and so did he. Now I knew something was wrong. It couldn't be an unmarked cop, it was some old ratty pickup truck. The truck started to flash its lights behind me. I didn't slow down. I was honestly afraid, because I had never experienced anything on the road like this. I kept driving, stepping on the gas just a bit to increase my speed 5 to 10 miles per hour, hoping to pass a cop or any other cars for that matter. But I couldn't see another set of taillights as far as the eye could see. Just the very seldom cars zooming past on the other side of the highway. The pickup truck behind me then switched lanes and floored it. I heard the aggressive roar of his truck's engine passing me. He cut in front of me, then he started to brake. I tried to swerve around him, but he kept blocking me. I was forced to stomp on the brakes too. I started to honk because it's all I could do. As we slowed, the man in front of me put on his hazards and started waving his arm out the window, signaling for me to pull to the side of the road. I obviously didn't listen. I took the chance to quickly pull around him as he started pulling onto the grass, and then I floored it. My sedan could easily escape his pickup truck, but I hit 100 and he was still not far behind me. I got off the highway at the first exit. I stopped at the red light at the end of the exit ramp, not expecting him to still be behind me, but they were. The pickup truck's headlights pulled up behind me, then the truck pulled up to the red light next to me. I looked to my left at the truck, and the window rolled down. Inside were 3 people, I'd assume men wearing vendetta masks. They all looked at me, trying to scare me, I'm sure. But it worked. I blew the red light onto the main road, and finally there were at least other cars around. The pickup truck finally stopped following me. At a certain point, I was scared I was going to be killed. It was more than just a road rage incident. I didn't get the plate number. In fact, I don't even remember seeing a plate on that truck. All I know is it was some 90s black pickup truck. After that, I parked in a Walmart parking lot and fell asleep. I woke up around 8 and finished the drive. I told my family about the incident, and I warn everybody to be careful when driving late at night. It was a Tuesday night in March. I was driving back from a friend's house in the city, a trek that would take me about an hour in decent weather, but a deep fog had set in on the long, lonely highway. After midnight, this particular stretch of road was often abandoned, save for the odd semi, their plates showing unfamiliar lettering and colors from places I'd never been to. It was 1 a.m. It had been a long day, wandering around for hours with my friend, shopping, checking out new cafes. It had left me tired. My eyelids were heavy, and the impenetrable fog made the highway an unending, drifting mess of hypnotizing gray. I drove cautiously, at times slowing my speed to a steady crawl and flashing my hazard lights to let anyone behind me know I was there. Suddenly, a vehicle appeared, its wheels half on the highway and half on the shoulder. I slammed on my brakes and pulled over behind it, narrowly passing by the bumper. My heart was beating heavily after the near miss, so I put my car into park to catch my breath behind the black sedan. I watched as the car began slowly rolling forward off the road, so it was fully parked on the shoulder. The car sat for a moment, then the driver's side window rolled down. An arm appeared and did a waving motion to pull over. At this point, the adrenaline from the sudden stop was still pumping through my body, and it made sense to move further off the road. I followed the car as it took a slight turn onto a side road. It came to a stop and the driver's side door opened. The driver walked towards me through the fog, a tall, lean guy wearing a black winter jacket and jeans. He looked younger, 30-ish, and he was smiling as he approached my car, illuminated by my headlights. I rolled down my window a crack, thinking maybe he was coming up to apologize for his unsafe parking. He got to my window and then motioned for me to roll it down further. I shook my head no, feeling uneasy, and told him I would be able to hear him. He asked where I was heading, and I said home. He said the fog wasn't supposed to let up anytime soon and that it wasn't safe to drive in. I let him know I was okay with it. He raised his eyebrows and asked why I pulled over then. I didn't want to start anything with this man, so I lied and said I had gotten a phone call and needed to pull over to answer it. He smirked, and it felt like he could tell I was lying. He said he lived with his wife and son just down the road, about 5 minutes, if I wanted to wait it out. I shook my head again, but he wasn't taking no for an answer. He tried to scare me, saying how it's 10 times more likely for me to die in a car crash when it's foggy, and that I looked tired and I should really think of my family before getting back on the road. I held my ground. He was getting angry. He began looking back at his car, and I saw someone move in the passenger seat I hadn't seen before. Suddenly the man was grabbing at my door handle, trying to open it. Thankfully it was locked. The passenger door to the car opened, and another man came running towards me with a baseball bat. I put my car in reverse, and the driver yelled something at him as I hit the gas. He took a swing at my car but missed. Luckily, I hadn't pulled too far off the highway, but it was hard to tell where this road ended and the highway began as I backed up in the heavy fog. I turned my wheels and put my car into drive, praying there was no traffic coming up behind me. I floored it as I haphazardly merged onto the highway, not looking back. I often wonder when I'm driving that stretch of road if they tried to stop anyone else that night, and what would have happened to me had I rolled my window down further. Scary things can happen on the road at night. Nighttime is when the creeps and weirdos come out, so you have to be extra careful. This was in 2020, right around when COVID started. I would often work overnight shifts at a hospital. My hours would be all over the place. I would always take the same route home, a parkway that I take 10 miles north to my town. It's never a busy parkway, even during the daytime, so at night, I'm almost always completely alone on the road, and COVID just made it even more of a ghost town. I never even see any state police at night either. Usually this is convenient for me as I get home quicker without any slow drivers around me. It was one night I was driving home in the middle of the night, or rather early hours of the morning. I see a red flashing SOS light stand perched up on the side of the road. As it's shown, it would light up the taillights of the car parked on the side of the road. Clearly someone was in need of assistance, and I was, I guess, in a good mood that night, so I pulled over in front of the car. As I passed the car, I saw a man waving his arms in the air. I put my hazards on and stepped out of my car to approach the man. Based on his skin tone and slight accent, he was a Hispanic man. Due to the COVID mask he was wearing, though, I couldn't gauge how old he was, but if I had to guess, I'd say late 20s, early 30s. I asked him what the problem was. He said his battery died after he stayed pulled over for too long. I asked him if he had jumper cables, because I did not. He said no. I didn't really know how else I could be of assistance other than offering him a ride, but then he asked if he could borrow my cell phone. He said his phone died too. I wasn't eager to hand this stranger on the side of the road my phone, but I did. I unlocked it for him and opened the phone app. He proceeded to call someone, then slowly walked away as he started to talk into the phone. His car door was open though, so I kind of decided to just take it upon myself to sit in the front seat and try turning the car on myself. And sure enough, the keys were in the ignition still. I turned the key one click to the right, and to my surprise, the battery turned on. I tried turning the hazards on, they worked. I turned the radio on, and it worked. So I then turned the key once more to the right to start the car now, and it started on the first try. I didn't have enough time to think about how I might have just walked into a trap, because as soon as the car turned on, I felt two arms wrap around my throat trying to choke me. I heard a voice yelling from outside, "Hey, hey," over and over. It was the guy with my phone. I broke out of the person in the back seat's grip pretty easily. I looked at him, and it was a young teenage kid in the back seat. The man with my phone was running back towards his car screaming at me. I picked flight over fight and ran back to my car and got out of there as soon as the car was on, and I swear to God, I heard a loud pop from outside that I found out moments later was a gunshot. My rear windshield had a hole in it, along with multiple cracks surrounding the hole. I couldn't call police until I got home since that guy still had my phone. I got home and told my parents, then went ahead and called 911 using the house phone. I explained to the police that I was led into a trap, that someone was hiding in the back seat, and that the man who shot at my car still had my phone, which was still unlocked with all my personal information on it. The police recommended I call AT&T immediately and asked them to track the last call that was made within the hour, but AT&T customer service didn't open until 7 a.m., so I had to wait. With the cops still there though, I used Find My iPhone on my dad's phone to lock my phone, which I hoped was before they could have found our home address on there. Come 7 a.m., I called AT&T to ask if they could track the last call made, but there were no calls logged since my phone call with my mom earlier the previous day at work. That meant the man never actually made a phone call to anyone, and I found out some more horrible news. All the Bitcoin I was holding in my Coinbase account was gone, many thousands of dollars worth of it, sent to some random Bitcoin wallet address, completely untrackable. The phone's location stopped updating once the thief either disposed of or turned off the phone. I never got it back. A week after this incident, I woke up to my mom's concerned voice. My dad knocked on my door and told me to come downstairs and outside. I was scared, but I followed him. He said he and my mom heard someone in our backyard, but when we checked, we didn't see anyone there. My mom wanted to call the cops, but my dad said we'd hold off until we heard another noise, which we never did. I don't know if what they heard was a person, but if it was, I really hope it wasn't that man who had my phone. My address was saved everywhere on that phone. Regardless, it's been 2 years now, so it's obviously over. Still, I will never stop to help somebody on a highway at night ever again. I remember this story clearly, as it always stuck in my mind whenever I think about playing hide and seek in the dark, or whenever I pass by an alleyway. I'll never forget what happened. It was in the fall, the start of October, and me and my 3 siblings went to visit my mom at her apartment. I have a sister, I'll call her Jess, and my 2 brothers, I'll call them Mike and Eli. My parents got into a divorce 2 years before that, and we barely saw my mother. So this was a way for our dad to be a good parent and allow us to visit, even though he wasn't required to. My mom's apartment was in the sketchy part of town. A lot of buildings around the apartments, but it always felt so empty, even with it being so crowded. My mom's apartment was next to an alleyway, which was also considered an entrance over to the apartment complex itself. That's what I mean when I say it was in a sketchy area. If you were to search around for it, you probably wouldn't even be able to find it, unless you were to go driving down a long, dark alleyway. My mom's apartment was on the second story, and my siblings and I were always excited whenever we had the chance to visit her. I loved my mom. She was small and cozy. Her apartment, too, was also very comfortable. It reminded me of my grandma's place, with soft furniture, unnecessary decor laying around. Another great thing about her apartment is her neighbors. A while back when we visited, we made friends with the neighbors downstairs, a boy and a girl, who I'll call Zach and Chi-Chi. Zach and I played a lot in the parking lot area of the apartment complex, next to the alleyway. Typical games like cops and robbers, tag, and kickball. But this day in particular, we decided since it was October, near Halloween, we should play hide and seek. He came up with the idea of playing it outside at night. My siblings of course wanted to join, and we all decided that at 9 o'clock, we'd all leave our rooms and go play. Since it was October, night came by pretty fast, and so did the dark, which resulted in pretty spooky lighting that we wanted to have. It was me, Zach, Chi-Chi, my sister, and my two brothers all playing. So once it hit 9 o'clock, we all did exactly as planned and left our rooms and joined each other outside. It was quite dark around the corners of the building, but the tall lampposts lit the parking lot with its orange rusty color. Whenever we play a game involving a tagger or seeker, we did that little game of bubblegum in a dish. So tonight we did just that, and we did it until Zach became the seeker. Everyone ran off into their little hiding spots, not too far off the complex boundaries, but not only limited to the parking lot itself. I remember I ran with my sister Jess, who I always stuck along with because she was the oldest. We ran over nearby the back of the apartment building, over by the large garbage tins. The only way to go here was to enter the long alleyway and go further down until the end of the building was exposed. And that's what we did. We figured that they wouldn't go all the way over here, so it was the perfect spot. As Zach yelled ready or not, the game began. At first, it was exciting, but the excitement quickly went away once we actually started to just wait for him to find us. A lot of silence, except the noise of the night. I started to get impatient, and so did my sister, but she whispered to me that they eventually will come by and find us. But a couple minutes later, we started to get bored. I did, at least. I said, maybe we hid too well, and she laughed. She told me that maybe we should just go and forfeit since it's becoming a little late. We started to get through the garbage bags and aside the large garbage tins, and then we were dead middle of the alleyway. That's when my heart dropped. I faced the end of the alley and met a figure standing in the alley light. I knew it wasn't anyone I knew, since the person was extremely tall, as if someone put on extra inches in their shoes to look taller. And the light made it hard to see their face since it was directly from the top, and so their hair made a large shadow on it. But then I realized something. Their hair, it was an afro, and it was colorful, like a clown wig. The worst thought came into my mind. It was a clown, and looking at the clothing, it did appear to be a clown. It wasn't even Halloween yet, so why was there someone dressed as a clown in the alleyway? What was scary was that the person just stood there, not moving a single muscle, and they were staring right at us. My sister pulled me back, seeing that there was something strange going on. She told me we should probably go back with the others, and so we did. We went down the long alleyway in hopes to find our friends and brothers. Luckily, we found one of my brothers, Mike, and then Chi-Chi was also there. Mike was confused as to why we were just walking out in the open. He thought we were still playing. We told them that we saw something weird, and we explained the weird guy dressed as a clown at the end of the alleyway. Where we were at was still technically in view of the clown, and so we moved aside to show them what we saw. And that's when we started to realize the situation was much more than we thought it was. The clown was closer, watching us and waving at us. Now we saw its face. It wasn't normal makeup. It was all black, like they didn't want their face to be seen. The only feature we could notice was their eyes, which to me, as a kid, made it a lot more scary. And then suddenly Chi-Chi screamed. We turned around to her, and she screamed out loud, "There's another person watching us." And she was right. It was another person, also a clown, but with green hair and longer legs. We knew at this moment we had to go. Chi-Chi and Mike ran away, and we didn't hesitate to follow. Chi-Chi ran to her room, and we ran upstairs to ours. We then met up with Eli, who was already in the room talking to our mom. Our mom gave us the biggest hugs, and we were confused. Like, did she know what happened? Eli explained that he told our mom what happened to him. Turns out, Eli was hiding in the apartment complex's courtyard, and he heard footsteps thinking it was Zach. He hid behind the bush and barely saw the person as they stepped in front. He thought Zach was about to catch him, but then he heard Zach's voice calling Eli. Eli turned and was found by Zach, saying, "I found you." That's when he turned back and looked up, and a clown was looking directly down at him. Eli ran away with Zach, and they both went to his apartment to tell his parents what happened. We explained what happened to us, and our mom was happy that we were all okay. I wished it ended there, but it didn't. Later that night, everyone was asleep, but I got thirsty. In the middle of the night, I went to get a bottle of water from the fridge, and I heard noise coming from outside the window, and looking back now as an adult, it was very stupid of me, but I went to the noise. It was weird. I remember questioning how was it possible for something to be knocking against the window, especially at the second floor. This part is what really scared the living shit out of me. When I lifted up the blinds, I came face to face with the clown. The same exact clown my sister and I saw. He was looking right at me, and that's when I screamed and ran to my mom. She came out, and when I went to show her what I saw, like a cliche from a horror movie, it was gone before she could see it. Luckily, my mom was a good mother, and she believed me. Ever since that day, I never liked playing hide and seek in the dark, and I've hated alleyways since. I don't know how that person got up at the window, I guess they climbed, but I'm glad that nothing really happened that night besides a few scares. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me when I was 11. I was in 6th grade. The school I attended was across the street from a beat-up looking house that honestly scared the living shit out of me as a kid. It just looked old and disgusting, and I couldn't understand why if someone was living there, why were they okay with how the outside of their house looked? Whenever me and my friends passed by that house on our way home from school, they'd make fun of it. I would scold them and say that the owner of the house wouldn't be too happy to see a couple of middle schoolers making fun of a place where they lived. Of course, my friends made fun of me for being scared of a reaction. I was a pretty big scaredy cat as a kid, seemingly afraid of an adult's angry reaction all the time, so they were not wrong. Passing that house was okay at first, but once October came and my friends were staying after school for the programs they did, things started going downhill from there. It started in the second week of October, my first time walking home from school alone in a while. As per usual, I walked by that creepy house, but this time, something was off and different. As I passed, I noticed someone from the house window was standing still, seemingly staring directly at me as I walked by. I was freaked out by that, of course, but nothing happened besides that, so I brushed it off. But it kept happening as the days went by with me walking home from school, with that same person watching me from their window. I couldn't tell if they were a male or female, but it didn't matter to me. I was scared shitless about being watched. I would tell my friends about it, and they would shrug it off and say that maybe the person was playing an early Halloween trick on me and trying to purposely scare me. I believed them, and would scold myself for being scared easily. But a week before Halloween, as I'm doing my usual walking home alone from school motto, I noticed the tall silhouette of a figure standing on the porch of that house, watching me walk by. I was scared, but I tried to be calm and brave and walked past the house. That's when things took a bad turn. As I walk by, the figure suddenly flies down the steps and starts to chase me. I scream at the top of my lungs and put some pep in my step and start to run. It seemed like I wasn't running fast enough. Whoever was chasing me was gaining on me. The person was seemingly a dude, judging by the voice, and he was yelling things at me that made absolutely zero sense at all. I knew I had to hide somewhere, and quick. So I ducked into an alleyway and hid behind a dumpster that smelled horrible, trying not to make any sudden noise that would help this crazy person find me and potentially hurt me. I could hear his footsteps stop by the alleyway, and I could also hear him mumbling words to himself as he walked closer to the dumpster I was crouching behind. My heart was leaping out of my chest, and I was praying that he wouldn't peek behind the dumpster and find me. I could literally hear his breathing to the point that I felt like he was going to find where I was hiding. But then I suddenly heard his footsteps running away from the alleyway. I remained crouched on the ground as I collected myself and wanted to make sure that the man was truly gone. Once I felt like the coast was clear, I ran the rest of the way home, and as soon as I entered, I told my parents what happened, and my dad decided to call the police. They arrived at our house in 20 minutes, and they had me explain what exactly happened and which house that man came from to chase me. Once they had that information, they let me and my parents know they would give us an update the next day. They stood by their words and came to find out nobody lived in that house. It had been vacant for years, which didn't make any sense. The police suggested that a homeless man or squatter most likely stayed in that house and for whatever reason decided he wanted to scare me. Nothing was done after that, and when I told my friends, even they were in shock and disbelief. Thanks to that day, I still get scared whenever I pass a house that looks creepy or abandoned. Even with me being 22 now, that day is still fresh in my brain. I come from a rural area in Poland. My country is still very much Christian, so Halloween isn't really widely celebrated. Many older people perceive it as satanic. Still, nowadays, many decorate their porches with stacked pumpkins. Some surprisingly made into jack-o'-lanterns, even in the countryside. At that time, I had a habit of taking my dog Susie for a walk each evening. It was mostly because Susie is rather on the larger side, and going out with her during the day was literally a nightmare. She used to hate kids and cyclists, so she would bark all the time and try to bite them. In the fall, it gets dark here pretty quickly, so 8 p.m. seems practically like the middle of the night. You can't see where you're going if there's no lanterns or streetlights. That day, it was dark already, and so I went out with my dog. There's a small road that I really like going on. It leads from the village supermarket that's quite close to my house to a church. It's not very long. It takes you maybe 10 minutes on foot. On one side of the road there's a forest, and on the other side, a large horse stud. It's pretty obvious that at night the path was practically empty, and you rarely met anyone there. I used to love the autumn vibes. Cold breeze, crunching leaves under your feet, and the feeling of solitude were perfectly nostalgic. I was walking like that, lost in my thoughts. I was approaching the end of the road, where the forest met an old stable which belonged to the local parish priest. As far as I know, it fell out of use many years ago, before I was even born. At that point, I was jolted out of my thoughts by Susie, who suddenly started barking like crazy. I looked around, trying to see if maybe a cyclist or another dog was approaching, but then I realized she was only focused on the stable and the trees. I should mention it was very hard to see anything beyond the tree line, as the streetlights were very dim and old in that place. My dog was acting as if she had literally gone mad, barking, growling, pulling hard on the leash. It wasn't typical of her, even when a bike went right by. I looked into the trees, trying to see what caused her to act so unhinged, and then I saw it. Maybe 10 to 20 meters away, right behind the priest's stable, I could see the silhouette of a man. At first, I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. I thought it must have been a bush. But the closer I looked, I realized it was definitely a person. Judging by the way his clothes reflected the moonlight, he must have been wearing all white. He was kneeling with his back straight, not really hiding, but not exactly in plain sight either. This gave me chills. I realized he was wearing some kind of white robe. He wasn't moving at all, just looking in my direction. I pulled hard on the leash, trying to get Susie to move, but she was stubborn. I told myself there was no way I was staying there a second longer, so I grabbed her by the harness and took off rather quickly. I didn't want to run because I was still unsure if the man realized that I had seen him. Thankfully, the church was only a minute away, and I saw some people standing by it. For a moment, I contemplated telling them about the person, but what would I exactly say? That there was somebody sitting near the bushes? The rest of my way home had to be the most nerve-wracking walk of my life. Every couple of steps, I looked back to make sure no one was following me. Even my dog wasn't sniffing around anymore. She was just walking quickly straight ahead. I did get home without any further problems, but I wish I could say it was the end of my story. That night, I was woken up to multiple sirens wailing. They went off for a good half hour. The next morning, I saw in the local news that somebody had set the priest's stable on fire. People were saying that it was probably some drunk teenagers trying to play a prank and pull stupid tricks, but I knew damn well I hadn't seen giggling teenage boys the previous evening. The person I saw looked disturbingly calm, as if they were waiting for something. There could possibly have been more people hiding in the shed, but if so, I'm happy I didn't actually see them, or I might have had a panic attack. I really don't want to be the one contributing to the propaganda that Halloween is a satanic festival, but what I saw that night was really disturbing. A person wearing white robes, silently kneeling, just out of the reach of the streetlights. What bothers me most is that between the time I saw him and the time of the fire, at least 5 or 6 hours passed. Like, were they kneeling there the whole time? What on earth were they doing there for most of the night? However, I do feel very relieved that he didn't decide to follow or even acknowledge me that night, and that Susie didn't pull me even closer to him. If that person, or rather those people, were willing to set the whole building on fire, I don't want to know what else they were capable of doing. Last October, I went to a pumpkin patch with my friends. It was right after school, and the air was cold and crisp. The leaves were orange and yellow, and the ground was covered in fallen leaves. We had been looking forward to this all week. The patch was small but busy. Families were walking around, kids were running with their parents, and the smell of baked goods from a small stand filled the air. We parked and grabbed a small wagon to carry our pumpkins. There were rows of pumpkins everywhere, big and small. We walked down one row and found some nice pumpkins to pick. Everything felt normal at first. My friend Kevin dared me to pick the biggest pumpkin at the back of the patch, the one that was near a little wooded area. I laughed and agreed. The path to the pumpkin was narrow. The further we went, the fewer people we saw. The laughter and chatter from the main area faded behind us. I noticed the trees around us were thick, and the shadows were long in the late afternoon sunlight. The wind made the leaves rustle, and it sounded like whispers. I tried not to think about it. When we reached the pumpkins, I noticed something strange. Behind the pumpkins, near the trees, there was a figure. At first, I thought it was a scarecrow. It was standing very still with a hat on, and its arms were out like a cross. But then I realized it was too thin to be a scarecrow, and the hat moved slightly, like someone breathing under it. "Do you guys see that?" I whispered. Kevin turned and looked, but he shrugged. "Probably just a decoration," he said. I wasn't sure. I had a bad feeling in my stomach. I picked up the pumpkin quickly, trying not to stare. The figure didn't move from beyond the tree. It just stayed there. We started walking back to the main area, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. The figure seemed closer. I couldn't tell if it was moving or if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Kevin noticed I was acting weird. "Stop looking back," he said, laughing. I didn't want to. Something about it made my skin crawl. When we reached the edge of the pumpkin rows, I turned to get one last look. The figure was gone. I felt a small sense of relief, thinking maybe it was just a person walking behind the trees or someone's costume. We headed toward the stand to pay for our pumpkins. The path was slightly darker now. The sun was almost gone, and the shadows were thick. As we passed the wooded area again, I heard a crack. It sounded like a branch snapping. Kevin didn't hear it. I stopped and said, "Did you hear that?" Kevin shook his head. I turned slowly, and my heart stopped. The figure was there again, about 10 feet behind us. No arms out this time, it was just standing. Kevin noticed I stopped moving and asked what's wrong. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry. The figure started to tilt its head like it was studying us. Then, seemingly without moving its legs, it started to move forward. It didn't even look like it was walking normally. It looked more like it was gliding, almost floating over the leaves. I grabbed Kevin's arm and we ran toward the stand. Our pumpkins bounced in the wagon as we ran. I could hear leaves crunching behind us, faster than they should have if it was just walking. When we reached the main area, people were still there, laughing and eating. I looked back, and the figure stopped at the edge of the pumpkin rows. It just stopped and watched. We paid for our pumpkins and got in the car as fast as we could. I didn't look back again. On the drive home, I told Kevin to promise me he didn't see anyone like that. He said he didn't, that he only saw the pumpkins and the trees, but I knew I hadn't imagined it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that damn figure standing there. I couldn't stop thinking about the way it moved, the way it looked like it glided. I tried to convince myself it was a Halloween prank, but it didn't feel like a joke. That was a family-friendly pumpkin patch, and that would be way too scary for little kids. A few days later, I read online that someone had reported seeing a strange person in a costume at the same pumpkin patch. They said it was late afternoon near the trees, and the person didn't speak or move like a normal person. The story didn't give names or faces, just the report. I haven't gone back to that patch since. Every October when the leaves start falling and the air gets cold, I remember that figure. I remember the way it moved. And I remember thinking, if it had wanted to, it could have followed us all the way to the car. I still don't fully have an explanation for it. I tell this story to friends, but most think I'm exaggerating. I'm not, and I could still picture it standing behind those trees, watching us. When I was 17 and looking to buy my first car, I was on Craigslist every single day. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just a beater car that could get me from point A to point B. My budget was $3,000 at most, so the cars I was looking at were no newer than 03, 04. I found an ad one day for a 2002 two-door Honda Accord. It was listed for $2,000, and the mileage was under 80,000, so right away I knew I wanted to check it out. The person who posted the ad lived a few towns over from us, a 20-minute drive on the highway. I convinced my mom to drive me out there to view the car after conversing with the guy over the phone. Originally, I texted him asking for details, but he ended up calling me. He sounded basically normal over the phone, actually rather polite. He answered some questions I had about the car and whatnot, and when he asked for my name and I told him Dan, he said, "Dan, what a great name. That's my name too." I laughed because it was the polite thing to do, but I just found it to be such an odd comment. Like everything about it, it almost sounded like he forgot his name was Dan because of the pause between "what a great name" and "that's my name." It just sounded sketchy. Nevertheless, everything else about the call went fine, so the next day, my mom drove me to the address the guy gave me. Getting off the highway and onto the streets, right away we agreed this was a trashy-looking neighborhood. Bars on windows, graffiti under bridges. I was hoping the guy's place wouldn't seem equally sketchy, but as we pulled up, it was. It wasn't a standard property like the rest in the area. The entrance to the property was between two houses. It wasn't a driveway, just some low-key road that led into an inlet with two more houses. Every house was cramped between other houses and buildings. But there I saw it, the Honda Accord, which was in, I guess, what you'd call the driveway for this house. My mom and I stepped up to the front door and rang the bell. We didn't know if it rang or not because we couldn't hear anything, so I knocked. One of the windows opened out of nowhere, and a man's voice said, "Come inside, the door's unlocked." I went to open the door, and my mom stopped me and whispered, "Are you sure you want to go in there?" I said yeah. I let ourselves in, expecting to be greeted by Dan. The inside of this place was kinda dark, not a lot of natural light came in through the minimal windows. "Hello?" I said. "Yeah, over here," a voice called. It was a deeper voice than I heard on the phone. "Dan?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. I began walking through the little kitchen, closer to his voice. My mom grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She whispered in my ear, "We're leaving." The man's voice now came from beyond this door at the end of the kitchen. He called up, "Down here, we could do the transaction here." My mom and I left the house in a hurry. As we were hurrying to my car, a lady at the next building over called to us. She came hurrying down from her front porch, warning us not to go in there. Then she asked why we were there, and we explained that I came to buy a car, but that he was calling us into his basement. The woman said that she's been concerned about that man living next door for months, that she thinks he's up to no good, and that he constantly has random cars pull up in the driveway in the middle of the night. We asked if his name was Dan. She said she wasn't sure, but that she vaguely remembered the guy introducing himself as Mike. She told us to just get far away from the house immediately, and so we did. It's disturbing to know my mom and I may have been murdered in that basement if we went down there. Like, how could we do a transaction before even viewing the car or agreeing on anything? Better question why in the basement. The whole thing screams trap. I don't know what else he could have wanted to do to us, more specifically me, in that basement. This actually happened to my best friend Chris. His family had just bought a new TV and they were thinking of just throwing their old one away. Chris's older brother John suggested to their dad Rick that they could sell the old TV on Craigslist to make some easy cash. Since the family never used Craigslist, John said he could set up the ad for him, since John's girlfriend used Craigslist before. So John put up an image of the TV with the description, used 55-inch Samsung 4K TV for $200. He also put Rick's phone number so if anyone was interested they could just call or text him. A week later, Rick got a call from a guy who introduced himself as Toby, and he said he was interested in the TV and wanted to know if he could come by the house at 10 o'clock that same night to pick it up. Rick said sure, and he sent Toby his address. Later that night, while Rick, Chris, and John waited outside the house for Toby to come so they could help him load the TV into his car, Rick got a call from Toby, and he said he wouldn't be able to make it to the house because he was almost out of gas, so he and Rick agreed to meet in the parking lot of a Circle K. After Rick got off the phone, him, Chris, and John loaded the TV in the back of Rick's pickup truck, and they took off to the Circle K where Toby said he was at, which was 15 miles away from the house. When they got there, they pulled up in a parking space next to the gas pumps, where Toby was filling up his car, a black Nissan Altima. A few minutes later, a tall, heavy-set bald guy with a goatee walked over to Rick's truck and said he was Toby. He told Rick that since the TV was big, it would most likely not be able to fit in his car, so he suggested that they could just follow him back to his house, and Rick agreed with him. After a few minutes of driving on the main highway, they got onto a back road, which looked sketchy because there was nothing but trees on either side of the road and it was filled with potholes. Toby texted Rick and said his house was at the end of the road. When they got to the end, the place that was supposedly Toby's house didn't even look like a house at all. It looked more like a tall, abandoned building. When they got out of the truck, Toby told them to untie the TV from the back so they could start unloading it. After they untied the TV, they turned around and saw 3 large men emerge from the back of the car, and they all pulled out guns, including Toby. They threatened to kill them if they didn't give them all they had on them. Rick, Chris, and John didn't hesitate, so they all gave the guys their wallets and phones, and they obviously took the TV too. After taking everything they had, the guys got back in the car and drove away. When Rick, Chris, and John got home, Chris and John told their mom everything that went down, and Rick called the cops and told them the whole story, and even gave them the license plate number from the car since he memorized it. To this day, Chris's family never heard of any arrest being made. That was the one and only time the family ever used Craigslist. Back in 2012, when Craigslist was more popular, I'd say, my house was broken into and robbed. A bunch of things were stolen, like 2 TVs, my Xbox 360, all of my video games, my hockey skates, and whatever stray cash I had laying around. I had the police come investigate the house, but nothing that would help track the perpetrator, including fingerprints, was found. I gave them a list of everything that was stolen, but the cops in my county usually suck, and they didn't help at all. Now I had to replace everything that was stolen. Believe it or not, the most costly thing to replace would be the video game collection, but I was starting with the replacement TVs. I went to Craigslist, and there was an ad that was posted earlier that day for a 40-inch Panasonic TV for a low price. Panasonic was the brand I had, so I contacted the seller and drove to his house that night. He let me into his disgusting home. It reeked, and the stains in the carpets and general messiness of the place didn't help. He brought me to this back room where the TV was. I examined it, and it was the exact TV that I had in my living room that was stolen. Then I started to look around the room, and I noticed another smaller TV that was tucked in the corner of the room, as well as an Xbox. The smaller TV looked exactly like my other TV that was stolen. I went to pick up the Xbox and checked the bottom of it for the specific long scratch in the case that mine had, and there it was. That was my Xbox. That was all of my shit. I looked at the guy, who had a confused look on his face, and I said, "Dude, you're the piece of shit that stole my stuff." His expression changed. He played dumb and had an angry tone now. He told me to get out of his house and lifted his shirt, exposing his gun holster. I live in Texas, so he likely had a license to carry. I left the house and called the cops. They arrived to the scene, but the man wouldn't let them in. He insisted they get a warrant and claimed that I was harassing him. I told the cops about my police report and the robbery and everything. They said they wouldn't be able to get a search warrant until the next day. I regretted not getting pictures while inside the room, but I wasn't thinking clearly in the moment. I was furious and I didn't know what to do. But that night, while I was getting ready for bed and doing research about search warrants, lawyers, and different possible outcomes to this situation, I heard a window break downstairs. Immediately, I knew it was him. Following my instincts, I climbed out of my window and down to the small ledge under my window. From there, I jumped to the ground and ran to my neighbor's house. My neighbor let me in while I called the police. They arrived within 10 minutes. I handed the police my spare house key I had hidden on the side of the house, and they investigated the house again, guns drawn this time, and inside they found him, hidden under my bed. If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. When I said earlier that cops usually suck, yeah, this was the one time I actually loved cops here. And yes, it was the man who posted the Craigslist ad. He actually broke into my house to kill me that night, as he had his gun on him, and why else would he be hiding under my bed? That doesn't sit well with me, even to this day. He was found guilty of breaking and entering with intent to commit murder beyond a reasonable doubt, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Even still, I moved to a new town and changed my number. I tried to strip any possible trail that could lead that man to me when he gets out. And I'm sure he's out by now for alleged good behavior. That's the part that scares me the most. All of this, over less than $1,000 worth of items. It actually makes me sick. I think Craigslist is one of the most dangerous places on the internet you could go. I once answered an ad posted on Craigslist for a free mini fridge under the free stuff section. I was setting up what people would call a man cave in my basement, and I needed a mini fridge for under the bar to store beers and other drinks inside. I checked the address on maps, and the house was apparently waterfront, sitting over a tall cliff overlooking a huge lake. The person who was texting me said his name was John, but that he wouldn't be in the house, just his elderly mother. He told me when I got there I'd have to let myself in and go to the far right bedroom from the foyer, as his mom is hard at hearing and she's very slow. I thought for a second, what if instead of me answering this ad, it were a bad person and they totally took advantage of the situation? It sounded almost too easy to rob this old woman's house. Well, I coordinated a time with John to go to his mother's house, around sunset, and I gotta say, as I pulled up to the long dirt path to the property, seeing that big house sitting at the top of the hill with the sun setting in the background over the cliff, it was beautiful. Before going into that house, I admired the view of the lake below for a couple minutes. Then I texted John that I was there. He repeated his instructions to just let myself in and go to the room to the far right, as his mom would be waiting in the bedroom. He reminded me she's very old and I'd have to do all the lifting myself. I said that's fine. I entered the house through the front door, which was left ajar. Right away I was hit with the smell of cotton. It reminded me of the smell of my grandma's house. I followed his directions and went to the door on the far right, which led me to a narrow hall. The house seemed rather large from first impressions. As I went down this hall, the smell of cotton suddenly shifted to this horrible smell. Literally, it smelled like death, like a rotting animal. I entered the doorway at the end of this hall, and the smell in that room was unbearable. That's because of the dead, rotting corpse on the bed. It was the rotting corpse of an older woman. It looked as though she'd been dead for a week or two. I wanted to throw up. I suddenly heard a loud, maniacal laughing from upstairs, accompanied with stomping in place. It seemed someone was in a room directly on top of me, simply stomping their feet to scare me, and it worked. I ran out of the house to my car, looked at the house one more time, and saw a man at one of the upstairs windows. Then I realized there was another person standing at one of the downstairs windows, both of them wearing face masks, like the same kind of mask you'd wear now for the coronavirus. My phone started blowing up with texts all of a sudden, all of them in capital letters. The first text said "ha ha ha," followed by "we see you, look at the windows," then a bunch of emojis. The last text I got from him said "come back inside, you forgot your fridge." I drove off the property, and while on my way home, I called the police and reported the dead body in the house. After they investigated the house and apparently confiscated the dead body, which had no signs of any stab wounds or bullet holes, police arrived to my house for questioning. I showed them the whole conversation and gave them the phone number, which I warned them was probably a fake number, and I was right. But an officer named Boris told me they'd still be able to trace the number even if it was through some kind of fake number app. So, a week later, I was curious about the status of the case. So I called the police station, but the woman who picked up the phone didn't know any information. That or she didn't care enough to look for me, because in general she was just kind of rude. I never read about or saw anything on the news about an arrest being made regarding this, so to this day I don't know if the people in that house were caught, or if they were even responsible for that woman's death. I remember this night like it was yesterday, even though I'm 26 now and it happened when I was 12. My parents left me home with my 18-year-old brother Zach for the night, and at first I was excited because it was just me in the big house, which felt like huge freedom at the time. Zach told me he was going out for a few hours with friends and made me promise not to tell mom and dad, which I agreed to because I trusted him, and also why wouldn't I want the place to myself? He would get in huge trouble if my parents were to find out, and he knew that. At first, I thought it would be fun to be alone, especially on a weekend night. I ended up in the den where I decided to watch a scary movie. At that age, while home alone, not the best idea, which I learned the hard way. I had never been home alone for this long before, especially at night, and honestly, halfway through the movie, I started getting scared. Not entirely because of the movie itself, but because of the way the house sounded. The random creaks in the floor, the wind brushing against the windows, even the fridge clicking on periodically. Every time the movie made a loud sound, I would flinch, and I would look over my shoulder to behind the couch to the half flight of stairs that led to the main floor, expecting to see someone there. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, and I didn't know why I was subjecting myself to scaring the crap out of myself. I turned off the TV and ran upstairs to my room like a scared little kid running from imaginary demons that follow you the second you turn off the lights. When I got to my room, I went into the bathroom that connected both to my room and my parents' bedroom, where I brushed my teeth as fast as I could and tried to calm down. After that, I went into my room to play Call of Duty Zombies on my Xbox 360, thinking it would make me a little less scared. I played for a few hours, losing track of time and focusing on the game. Eventually, my team and I died on zombies, and I got frustrated. I decided it was late and I should go to sleep though. Not long after that point, I felt the vibration of the front door closing, and I assumed it was Zach coming back. I lay there awake, listening to the sounds of my brother moving around downstairs, which was odd because usually when he'd get home, he'd go right upstairs to his room. But there were weird sounds coming from downstairs for too long where it started getting unusual. They were subtle, little footsteps or indescribable thumps and thuds. I felt my stomach start churning a little. That stupid idea to watch that scary movie was really getting to me. I got up and went to the window to look outside, expecting to see Zach's car in the driveway where he usually parked, but it wasn't there. That's when the real panic set in. I had no cell phone at the time, I was only 12, so I had no way to contact my parents or Zach without leaving the bedroom and going to one of the house phones, which felt impossible at that moment. I quietly tiptoed to my bedroom door to confirm that it was locked, knowing that the lock could be unlocked from the other side with just a fingernail. I knew that if someone wanted to get in, they easily could. I looked around and decided the only safe place to hide was the small crawl-in closet built into the wall of my room. I squeezed inside, shut the door carefully from the inside, and tried to calm myself as I listened. It was at this point that I vividly remember hoping that I was just being overly paranoid and that it actually was Zach. Maybe he parked on the side of the house instead. Seconds later, I heard someone fumbling with the door, trying to get in, and then moments later, the door opened. The person was inside my room, and I had no idea who it was or what they wanted. I stayed completely still, listening to footsteps moving around my room, feeling the floorboards creak beneath the weight of someone walking, and hearing things being moved and shifted around. Every second felt like an eternity. I was terrified that the closet door could open at any second and I could be dead. I still prayed it was my brother, but I stayed quiet, barely breathing and hoping that whoever it was would leave. I could hear them dragging something across the floor at one point, which made me even more nervous. I felt like hours had passed, though it was probably only minutes. Eventually, I heard footsteps receding and moving away from my room. I stayed in the closet for what seemed like forever, likely 2 hours, until finally, I heard Zach calling my name from across the house. His voice sounded urgent and pissed off, and a few moments later, he came into my room and called my name again. I stepped out of the closet, and the first thing he did was yell at me, asking what I was doing in there and what I had done to his room. It was this moment that confirmed to me that it was in fact not my brother who was in the house. I explained the situation as quickly as I could, still shaking and unable to stop my hands from trembling. Once he understood, we both got up and started looking around the house together. That's when we realized how bad it really was. Drawers had been pulled out, some of our electronics were missing, including TVs and gaming consoles. It was clear someone had been through the house and had taken things that were valuable. Zach immediately called the police, knowing that this was serious, and we waited together, still on edge, checking doors and windows to make sure nothing else was taken. The police came and made a report, writing down everything that was missing and asking us questions about what happened. They told us they would investigate and that we should wait for our parents to get home. Around 4 a.m., our parents arrived. My dad was furious and went straight for Zach, smacking him square in the face for being such a careless idiot. Not only leaving me alone, but leaving the front door unlocked. My mom checked on me, gave me a hug, and told me she was just glad I was safe. Zach was forced to pay monthly rent from that point on to slowly pay back for all the things that were stolen and treated with extreme caution after that night. I, on the other hand, was not punished at all. I was just shaken up, terrified of what had happened, and the whole experience stuck with me for years. Every time I thought about it, I could feel the fear all over again, remembering hiding in that closet and hearing someone walking around my room, not knowing if I would make it out alive. It was by far the scariest experience of my life, and it has stayed with me, even now. When I was just a child, not even in kindergarten, I lived with my grandparents. My mom and dad had just separated, and my dad worked in the next town over, so I saw him every weekend. My uncle, my dad's brother, also lived with us, so I was rarely ever truly alone. I was always told to never answer the door for strangers. It was a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other. We had a neighbor who visited often to watch hockey, wrestling, or join family barbecues. I'll call him David. He was friendly with both my grandpa and my uncle. He often drank beers with my uncle and helped my grandpa with yard work or truck repairs. If my grandpa came home with a moose from hunting, he and David would haul it into the shed together. One night, I was briefly left home alone. My grandma was at bingo and had called for a pickup. My grandpa told me he was going to get her and asked if I wanted to come. I refused because I was watching cartoons. He reminded me not to open the door for strangers, then he left. As soon as I saw the truck pull away, the house got quiet. Only a few minutes later, someone knocked at the door. I ran up and asked aloud who it was, and I just heard David's familiar voice identifying himself. I told him that my grandparents weren't home, and he replied that he had just seen my grandpa leaving. I told him my uncle wasn't home either, and he said he had been talking to my uncle on the phone and knew he was out drinking at a friend's place. Then he asked to come in. I told him I wasn't allowed to open the door for strangers, and he insisted he wasn't a stranger since he was our neighbor and someone I already know. In my child mind, he was right, but I didn't understand why he would come over when my grandpa and uncle weren't there. I unlocked the door and opened it. David towered over me. He was obviously drunk, swaying, slurring, squinting with one eye. He stepped inside and put his hands on my shoulders as I backed up. I didn't feel alarmed yet because I had seen my uncle drunk many times. I told him he could wait in the kitchen while I went back to watch TV, but he would not let go of my shoulders. I tried to pull his hands off of me, but couldn't. His voice changed, filled with anger, and he said things that frightened me, though I can't remember the exact words now, only the fear that they put in me. He dragged me into the kitchen and grabbed a large knife. He pressed the tip against my belly and asked if I wanted to be stabbed. When I cried, he told me to quiet down or he would cut my tongue or slit my throat. He dragged the dull side of the blade across my throat to show he was serious. Then I heard my grandparents' truck pulling in. Car doors closed outside. Relief flooded me, and I was about to scream for help, but David clamped his hand over my mouth. He turned us both toward the doorway just as my grandma entered. Her smile vanished when she saw him holding me with a knife. She screamed for my grandpa to get inside immediately. My grandpa rushed in, yelling in shock and fury as he demanded to know what was happening. He took one look at David holding me hostage and charged forward, shouting at David with pure rage. David shoved me to the floor. My grandma rushed over, grabbed me tightly, and blocked me from seeing what was happening while telling me I was safe. I could still hear the struggle. Eventually, my grandpa overpowered him. When I finally looked up, my grandpa was shoving David out the door, yelling at him to never come back, and then slamming the door. As I grew up, I realized David had waited deliberately. He must have known my uncle wasn't home and that my grandma was at bingo. He had seen my grandpa leave. That was his moment. I was too young to understand his intentions. Years later, after my grandpa's funeral, when I was sitting with my grandma discussing memories, I brought up that night and how heroic Grandpa had been. She looked uneasy. She said it was truly a terrifying night. She asked if I remembered that my grandpa went out hunting that same night. I faintly remembered him leaving, even though hunting at night wasn't something he usually did unless it involved camping. When I asked why he left, she claimed she didn't remember much. It got me thinking. They never called the cops to press charges on him, and I never saw him again after that night. My grandpa was respected in the community. He was friends with, as well as went to the same church as some police officers, and was known to be a good hunter. No one would ever question if they saw a bloody tarp in the back of his truck, and he was driving out of town late at night. This story happened a few years ago during spring break in 2020 when I was 15. I was home alone one night while my parents were out of town. I was just hanging out in my room when I got a call from one of my mutual friends from school, who I'll refer to as Mason. I don't usually get calls from Mason, let alone texts or keep in touch with him, but I answered anyway. Before I could get a word out, he asked what I was doing. I told him I was just at home and wasn't up to anything. He then asked if he could drop off one of my buddies because he needed a place to stay for the night. This buddy of mine is someone I've known since 3rd grade, who I'll refer to as Neil. I basically told him I didn't feel like having company over and just wanted to chill by myself. After hearing this, Mason practically begged me to let Neil stay at my house. I could sense desperation in his voice as he pleaded with me to let him drop Neil off. I was still reluctant at first, but then Mason told me he'd let me use his weed pen if I let him drop off Neil. After he said that, I caved and told them they could pull up. Looking back, I realized how dumb I was to let something like that persuade me, considering what happened next, but I was a stupid pothead at the time, so what can you do? Neil has always been very outgoing, almost with zero filter, and he doesn't care what others think about him. So when I heard from my brother and other friends the week prior that he had started acting really weird in his classes, I didn't think much of it at first. I asked my brother to elaborate, and he told me that Neil would sometimes start laughing or clapping out of nowhere, even if the classroom was completely silent, and he would sometimes say very strange things to people for no reason, like claiming the basketball coaches were Freemasons trying to convert him. After hearing this, I realized Neil wasn't acting normal, and it wasn't until he and Mason arrived at my house that I understood how bad it really was. I met Mason and Neil at my front door and greeted them like any other day. I hit Mason's weed pen as promised and gave it back. As Mason was about to leave, he grabbed Neil by the shoulders in a very serious way, tears forming in his eyes, and he pleaded with him not to do that thing. Neil looked at him blankly and casually responded that he understood. I really should have asked what was going on, but for some reason, I didn't, and I let Neil inside as Mason left. After I closed the front door, the first thing Neil asked me was whether all the doors in the house were locked. Red flags immediately went off in my head, and I knew I had just gotten into something bad. I told him they were locked and asked why. He asked me to check, so I led him down the narrow hallway by the front door to show that the back and laundry room doors were both locked. He didn't say anything after I confirmed it, and we stood in silence for a few seconds. Then, out of nowhere, his hand shot up like he was raising it, and he put on this eerie, toothy smile that I can still see clearly in my mind. He held it for a few seconds before lowering his arm without saying a word. I forced a fake chuckle to make the situation seem less weird. Then, Neil asked for some water, so we went to the kitchen. As I grabbed bottles from the fridge, I noticed him lingering by the drawer with silverware, including the knives. I watched as he slowly opened the drawer and reached for a steak knife. Without thinking, I ran over, grabbed his hand before he could take it, and slammed the drawer shut. Neil didn't react or move. He just stared at me and let out a chuckle like he was pretending it was a joke. At that moment, I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, and I was frozen in fear. The kind of fear people describe in life or death situations. I had never felt like my life was in danger until that moment, and I could only focus on how I was going to get Neil out of my house. He finally broke the silence by suggesting we go to the park in the neighborhood. I agreed as if nothing happened. We walked to the laundry room leading to the driveway, and I intentionally let him out first. I told him I needed to put shoes on, which I did. He paused and subtly looked disappointed, telling me to hurry up. I shut the door, locked it immediately, and called my brother to explain what had just happened. After finishing the call, I grabbed every knife in the kitchen and brought them upstairs to my room. Keep in mind, I was stoned at the time, so my decision-making wasn't perfect, but I knew I needed to prevent Neil from forcing his way back into the house. My brother arrived with 3 friends in less than 5 minutes, and they met Neil outside. I stayed inside for a few minutes, nervous, then went out. My brother and friends were talking to Neil, who was rambling about the school's basketball coaches being in the Illuminati and claiming they would sexually assault the boys on the team to make them play better. He continued talking nonsense for a few minutes, then we decided to get him home, because there was no way I was letting him stay under my roof after what had happened. One of my friends eventually took Neil home, even though he insisted he couldn't go because he believed his dad was going to kill him. After all of this, I called Mason to ask what Neil had said to him that made him act that way, and Mason explained that during the car ride, Neil had been reading a manifesto claiming he needed to kill himself or someone else to prevent his dad from trying to kill him. Mason had panicked and just wanted to get rid of Neil, which explains why he sounded so desperate to drop him off at my house earlier. After hearing this, I lost my mind and asked Mason why he would just dump Neil at my house without warning me, though I knew part of the fault was mine for not asking sooner. Later, it was revealed that Neil had taken drugs he shouldn't have, which triggered schizophrenic episodes and caused him to hear voices. About a month later, I told my mom the story, and she was not thrilled, to put it lightly. Needless to say, I avoided something truly horrific that night by being on edge when Neil entered the house, and I still think about what could have happened if I hadn't paid attention to him in the kitchen. I was 10 years old when this happened. My mom had gone grocery shopping that day, and she asked if I wanted to come. I remember making a big stink about not wanting to. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and I just wanted to stay home and shoot hoops in the street. I told her nothing bad would happen, and she would only be gone for a couple of hours. She finally gave in and let me stay. As soon as she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed the old basketball from the garage and started shooting around in the street where we had a hoop set up. I shot around for a while, doing little games with myself, pretending I was down by 1 with a buzzer shot. I was sweating a little from running back and forth, and at one point I stopped to catch my breath. I bounced the ball lazily and looked around the neighborhood as I caught my breath. That's when I looked up toward the house. At the upstairs window, someone was staring down at me. It was only a shadow behind the glass at first, like someone was standing back from the sunlight. I stared for a good second or two before the shape shifted slightly, and I realized it wasn't some kind of trick from the sun. Someone was up there at the window, looking out at the street. None of my family was supposed to be home. My sister was at college, my dad was at work, and my mom was across town buying groceries. I dropped the basketball without meaning to. The window was my sister's room. The blinds were half open, and the figure was right behind them. I say figure because that's all I saw, no distinguishable features. I didn't know what else to do except run inside and see who was home. I ran around the side of the house and through the backyard gate. I burst inside and slammed it shut behind me. I yelled up the stairs asking who was home. My voice cracked when I yelled it. For a second, I didn't hear anything. Then a voice answered from upstairs. It said, "Brad, come upstairs." It wasn't my mom, it wasn't my sister, and it wasn't my dad. It was deeper than any of their voices, but not deep like a grown man trying to sound scary. It sounded like someone trying to sound normal. I didn't go anywhere near the stairs. I ran straight through the house, grabbed the house phone off the kitchen counter, and sprinted back outside as fast as I could. I called my mom and told her someone was in the house, and she didn't believe me at first. She told me that's not something to joke about, and she said that she was almost done shopping. But I started basically crying into the phone, telling her I wasn't joking, telling her I heard someone call my name from inside, and they're at the upstairs window. She finally believed me when I started sobbing and begging her to come home. She said she was leaving the store right now. After she hung up, she must have called the police, because a cop car pulled up at the same time my mom's car turned into the driveway. She ran to me asking where I saw the person. I pointed to the upstairs window. The police went in first. My mom followed them inside after a minute or two. I waited out front. I didn't want to go back in there. For 10 minutes, I just stood there, staring at the upstairs window. No one appeared at it again. Eventually, one of those officers came out and told me it was safe to come inside. I went in and pointed upstairs to the room where I saw the man. They checked the closets, under the bed, behind the dresser. They even checked the attic. They checked every room in the house. They didn't find anyone or anything. After the police left, my mom started acting doubtful again. She said she believed me, but I could tell she didn't fully. She said if she found out I was messing around, I'd be punished for scaring her and wasting the police's time. I kept telling her I wasn't lying. She kept saying she knew, but her voice said something else. That night, I had trouble falling asleep. I kept thinking about the voice and that shadow behind the blinds. But eventually, I got tired enough to drift off. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still dark out, and at first I thought I woke up from a bad dream. But then I heard something in my room. Just loud enough to wake me. I sat upright in my bed. My eyes were still adjusting to the dark, but I could see the outlines of my room. I could see my dresser, my closet door cracked open, my shelves, and across the room, not far from my bed, I saw something else. An unfamiliar shape. A tall, dark shape, standing completely still. For a second, I thought I was imagining it, but then the slightest movement made me realize what it was. It was a person, a full-grown person standing in my bedroom. I didn't even have time to breathe. I just screamed, a loud, broken scream that tore out of my throat. As soon as I screamed, the figure moved, fast. It darted across my room in 2 steps, grabbed my window, slid it open, and jumped out. I heard the man's feet land on the small awning below the window. My parents burst into the room as soon as I screamed. My dad ran straight to the window and looked out. Then he ran downstairs and out the back door to try to find whoever it was. I'm fairly certain he ran out there barefoot. He came back a few minutes later out of breath. He kept shaking his head and saying he didn't see anyone. They called the police again, but that time it was mostly just to file another incident report and for the cops to scout the area. We don't know how long he was in the house. All I know is he was inside during the day, long enough to know my name, and he was watching me from my sister's window, and he stayed in the house until nightfall. That, or he snuck in and out of the house through my bedroom window by climbing up on that awning. Either way, he was in my room while I slept, standing there in the dark. Who knows what else he did while he was in the house? That's the scariest part. I'm using a voice transcription thing on my phone since I don't really like typing and I'm not the best with words. This was, God, I don't even know, like 7 or 8 years ago now. Maybe 6, I'm not really sure. My life's been a bit chaotic since then, so my head's filled with all sorts of memories and whatnot. Anyway, this was New Year's Eve back when I was still dating my ex, Duda. We were on our way back from a party when everything went down. It must have been well after midnight because I remember being extremely tired. Also, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that driving on New Year's Eve isn't exactly the smartest decision, but we had no choice. The party had been at Duda's friend's place, but we were late additions to the guest list, so there weren't any sleeping arrangements left for us. The drive was actually pretty long, maybe 30 minutes give or take. The roads were pretty much empty, which I remember being grateful for. It had snowed earlier that day, so the streets were icy as hell. And honestly, the last thing I needed was to be dodging traffic on top of everything else. Duda was half asleep in the passenger seat. I had the heat cranked and some random rock playlist going just to keep myself from drifting off. You know how it is. We were maybe 10 minutes from her place when it happened. Okay, so I don't even know how to describe what I saw. One second the road ahead was completely empty, and the next there was just a woman, literally standing in the middle of the street. And she wasn't like crossing or anything. She was just there, facing my car like she'd been waiting for us or something. I remember my brain just not being able to process it fast enough. I was already slamming on the brakes before I even realized what I was looking at. And then I realized she was holding a knife. It was down by her side, this massive kitchen knife, the kind you'd use to like carve a turkey or something. My headlights were hitting her full on, and I could see her face was all twisted up, like she was crying or screaming, or maybe both. It was sickly. I don't think I've ever reacted faster in my life. I yanked the wheel to the right to avoid hitting her, but the second I did, she lunged at the car. I heard the impact before I understood what happened. Despite the chaos of everything unfolding so quickly, I knew exactly what happened. She had swung the knife at my car as I passed. Even though I had avoided her, the swerve combined with the ice was just too much. I felt the tires lose grip, and suddenly we were spinning. Duda had woken up by then and immediately started freaking out. I was gripping the wheel like it would actually do something, but there was nothing I could do. The car was not under my control. We spun a full 180 and were basically facing the other direction by the time the car stopped. After recovering from the shock of almost dying, I looked up through the windshield and felt sick all over again, because we were now facing the direction we'd come from, which meant we were facing the woman. She was maybe 30 feet away, still holding the knife, illuminated by my headlights like something out of a horror movie, and she was limping toward us, like she was trying to move fast, but she was clearly injured. She was also screaming something I couldn't understand, just this guttural, incoherent noise that sounded more like an animal than a person. It was, and probably still is, the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed with my own 2 eyes. I remember Duda yelling at me to do something, but I was just frozen. I couldn't look away from this woman lurching toward us. Her clothes were dirty and torn, and her hair was all matted and wild. I don't know if she was on drugs or having some kind of mental breakdown or what, but there was nothing behind her eyes. There was nothing there. It honestly looked like she was a dead person walking. She was maybe 15 feet away when my survival instincts finally kicked in. I threw the car in drive and slammed on the gas. The tires spun on the ice for this terrifying second before catching, and we started moving. I thought we were clear, like I thought that was it.
But of course, I was wrong. I don't know how she moved that fast. Like 1 second she was in front of the car, and the next she was on it. She threw herself onto the hood, and I felt the whole car shudder from the impact. Duda was screaming, I was cursing, and this woman was clinging to the hood of my car with one hand while stabbing the windshield with the other, just like over and over again. I felt like she was trying to get into my car and kill me. I felt like I was gonna die. I couldn't see or think. I just started swerving the wheel back and forth as hard as I could. The woman was sliding around on the hood, but she wouldn't let go. She was still screaming that horrible wordless scream, and her face was inches from the glass, and I swear to God, her eyes were locked on mine the entire time. On the third or fourth swerve, she finally lost her grip. I watched her roll off the side of the hood and hit the pavement really hard before sliding into the shoulder. The car fishtailed again, but I managed to keep it under control this time. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her lying there. She wasn't moving. Part of me wanted to stop. I know that sounds insane given what just happened, but I thought maybe I'd killed her. Like maybe she was just some mentally ill person who needed help, and I just killed her. Duda grabbed my arm and told me not to stop. She was shaking and kept saying we needed to go, that it wasn't our problem, that we couldn't get involved. I said we should at least call the police, but she also shut that down immediately. She said the cops would blame us since we've been drinking, and that there was no way they'd believe our story. She said we'd get arrested or something. Looking back, none of that made sense, but Duda had this way of making everything sound urgent yet logical in the moment. She was always like that, very persuasive and borderline manipulative, honestly. I left that woman on the side of the road, drove Duda home, and didn't tell anyone. I still feel sick thinking about it. The damage to my car wasn't even that bad, just the cracked windshield, the knife marks on my driver's side window, and a few scratches on the hood. Surprisingly, there wasn't even any blood on the car. I got it fixed like a week later, but the guilt stuck with me for months. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see a story about a body found on that road or a missing woman or something, but nothing ever came up. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse, honestly. Part of me wonders if she got up after we left and just walked off into the woods or something. Part of me doesn't want to know. The thing that really messed with me, though, was Duda. She acted like nothing happened. Like within a couple days, she was back to her normal self, making plans, going out with friends, whatever. I brought it up once and she got annoyed with me, telling me I was being dramatic and that we did what we had to do. I remember just staring at her and thinking like, how can you be so cold about this? A woman tried to kill us and we might have killed her, and you're willing to just forget about the whole thing? We broke up a few months later for unrelated reasons. Well, mostly unrelated, but I'd be lying if I said that night didn't change how I saw her. Maybe I'm the crazy one, but an experience like that is not something you can easily forget, let alone move on from in 2 days. I might have ended someone's life that night. That deranged woman might have ended my life that night. That's not something you can just forget about. I went to Cal Berkeley for undergrad. It's where I met one of my closest friends, a guy named Garrett. His real name is Guo, but when we first met freshman year, he introduced himself by his quote, American name, and it just stuck. He's originally from Hong Kong, came to the States to study computer science, and is genuinely one of the smartest people I've ever known. After grad, we went our separate ways geographically. I moved to New York for work, and he went back to Hong Kong for the same reason. We're both in our late 20s now, both doing pretty well career-wise, both single. We try to see each other at least once or twice a year, whether that's him flying out to visit me or me taking a trip to Asia. I know it's pretty fortunate to be able to travel so frequently, so I never take that for granted. This incident happened last New Year's Eve, and I still think about it constantly. I've told a few people, but no one really knows what to make of it. Nor do I. Oh, by the way, Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. That means when it's midnight in Hong Kong, it's only 11 a.m. on December 31st in New York City. Garrett celebrates both the regular New Year and the Chinese New Year, so he was out partying that night, same as me, just half a day earlier. I spent New Year's Eve with my two closest friends in the city, Rylan and Ari. We started at Ryland's apartment for drinks, then made our way to this rooftop party in Williamsburg that one of Aris's coworkers had invited us to. It was honestly pretty fun and decently upscale, at least for Brooklyn. Around 11:30 or so, I started talking to this girl. She was standing near the bar by herself, and I honestly just walked up and introduced myself. We hit it off immediately. She had this energy about her that I can't really describe. Super easy to talk to, funny, engaging. We talked for maybe 5 minutes before she pulled me onto the dance floor. Her name was Maitreyi. I remember asking her to repeat it because I'd never heard it before. She laughed and told me everyone just calls her Maitri because that's basically how you pronounce it. I thought that was kind of charming. She pulled out a pen and spelled it for me on my hand just in case I, quote, forgot. Things escalated quickly from there. We danced, talked some more, and kissed at midnight. By around 12:30, she asked if I wanted to get out of there, so we grabbed an Uber back to my place in the East Village. I'll skip the next few details, but I will say it was a great night. We stayed up talking for a while afterward, and I learned a decent amount about her. Here's everything I remember. She was originally from San Diego. She was an artist, more specifically a painter, and she mentioned she used to do graffiti and murals before transitioning to more traditional stuff. Her middle name was Mia, which was also the name of one of her cats. The other cat was named Cosmo. Her birthday was April 28th. Her best friend growing up was from some tiny town in Germany called Hillesheim. Her dad was a patent lawyer. These are random details, I know, but they become important later, trust me. At some point, she mentioned her clothes smelled like the bar, so I threw them in the wash for her. She borrowed one of my t-shirts to sleep in. We fell asleep not long after that. I can't remember really what time it was. When I woke up the next morning, she was gone. At first, I didn't think much of it. People leave after hookups, it happens. I figured she slipped out early to avoid any awkwardness, which was fine. But then I started noticing things that didn't add up. The first thing was my apartment door. I have a standard lock that you can only lock from the outside with a key, meaning it doesn't auto-lock. When I got up to use the bathroom, I noticed the lock was still engaged, which meant either she had somehow locked it from the outside without a key, or she'd never left at all. But both of those were impossible scenarios. I checked the rest of the apartment. My place isn't big. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, a small kitchen. There's no second exit. The windows also don't open more than a few inches. I even searched my closet like an idiot, as if she might be hiding in there, but she wasn't. The impossibility of the situation made me start questioning my sanity. I started wondering whether my drunken state had caused me to imagine the whole encounter entirely. I kept pacing around my apartment frantically, as if she would just appear out of some corner and reset everything back to normal. Her clothes were also gone from the dryer, which added to the mystery, and the shirt I lent her was nowhere in sight, proving that she had slept over. But she was nowhere. I stood there for a while trying to figure out what the hell had happened, but no explanation I could come up with made sense. To make matters worse, I soon realized that I never got her number, or any form of contact at all for that matter. For the rest of the day, I tried to piece together everything I could remember about her. The details I listed earlier, that's pretty much everything. I kept repeating them in my head because I knew I'd forget eventually. Later that afternoon, I randomly felt compelled to call Garrett. I don't know why exactly. It was just a super bizarre impulse that just kind of came out of nowhere. It wasn't like I had anything specific to tell him. I just had this weird urge to ring him. We caught up for a bit, talked about work, talked about our respective New Year's celebrations, the usual stuff. He seemed a little off, though. Eventually, I asked him what was wrong. He sighed and told me he met a girl the night before. They'd hit it off, gone back to his place, and she left the next morning without saying goodbye. No number or contact or anything, and he was bummed about it. I laughed and told him the exact same thing happened to me. Like, the exact same thing. But here's where things get really freaky. He told me her name was Maitreyi, like my tree. I felt this weird chill run through me. I asked him to describe her, and he started listing details. Everything matched up almost perfectly. Her birthday was April 28th, she was from San Diego, a painter who used to do graffiti. I cut him off before he could finish, and asked if she had a cat named Mia. That's when he went a little silent before saying yes. You could imagine what happened next. The two of us spent like 15 minutes just listing as many things as we could remember about her, and all of it lined up. It was actually kind of horrifying. It gets worse though. He actually had pictures with her, something I didn't have, and he showed them to me. It was the exact same girl, I'm 100% certain. We tried to rationalize it, but every explanation we could come up with was ridiculous. And here's the thing. Hong Kong is 13 hours ahead of New York. Garrett met her around 11 p.m. on December 31st, Hong Kong time. I met her at around 11:30 p.m. on December 31st, New York time. That's roughly a 12-hour difference, but a flight from Hong Kong to New York takes at least 15 hours, and it's usually longer, more like 16 or 17. Even if she had somehow gotten on a plane the second she left Garrett's apartment, she couldn't have made it to that rooftop party in Williamsburg in time. The math didn't work. It was literally impossible. And even if we ignore the flight time somehow, how would she have known to go to that exact party? How would she have ended up talking to me? How would she have known to use the same name, the same details, the same everything? I still don't have answers to any of these questions. Neither does Garrett. We've talked about it probably a dozen times since then, and we always end up at the same place. We don't know what happened, and we probably never will. Neither one of us saw that girl again. The thing that messes with me the most is how real it all felt. I know for a fact that she wasn't some drunken hallucination. I literally talked to her for hours. She slept in my bed, and then she just vanished from a locked apartment with no other exits. Garrett and I don't really know what to do with this. We've both tried looking her up online, but Maitreyi with no last name and only vague details about being an artist from San Diego doesn't exactly narrow things down. We found nothing. New Year's Eve is fast approaching, which is why this is all fresh in my head again. Usually, the insanity of crazy, unexplainable experiences fades over time, but for some reason, it feels like the opposite for me. The more time passes, the freakier it is to think about the possibility that I may have slept with a ghost on New Year's Eve. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I don't have a better explanation for what happened. This story is one of my dad's. Before he had kids, my dad and my mom used to travel a lot. He had made some smart business moves in his mid-20s, so he had money to spend and the free time to spend it. They were both big skiers, but the only good skiing that was accessible to New York City was in Vermont. So over the years, they actually purchased a few lodges up there. The first one was in Ludlow. They bought it from some guy named Mr. Black who lived on West End Avenue in the city. It was this old black shuttered place that my dad always referred to as the Black House, partly because of the shutters and partly because of the previous owner's last name. They'd sell quarter shares to friends and cycle things out every few months to help cover the costs. They kept the place for a few years before eventually switching to a second property. The second lodge was about halfway between Ludlow and Rutland, right along Route 100 in what locals call the Lake District. There are like 5 lakes in a row along that stretch of road, and the house sat right on the edge of one of them. My dad's friend Victor and his wife Lisa went in on that one with them. Victor and my dad had been close since college, and the 4 of them would take trips up there together pretty regularly. This happened one New Year's Eve. I can't remember exactly what year, but it was obviously before I was born. Lisa and my mom were away for a friend's wedding or something. I can't really remember the specifics, but it's not that important. What matters is that Victor and my dad decided to take a trip up to Vermont by themselves to ring in the new year. It was the night of December 31st. The 2 of them were upstairs cracking a few beers and just catching up. The upstairs of that lodge had these full-length windows that looked out over the lake, so they'd sit up there, listen to music, and watch the snow. It was snowing, of course, but not so heavily that you felt trapped. My dad said it was really peaceful that night, one of those nights you share with a good friend where you're both just happy to be far away from everything. They had the radio on, waiting to hear the countdown from Times Square, and then all of a sudden, things got crazy. They were mid-conversation when a huge flash of light came from somewhere across the lake. My dad said his first thought was fireworks, but the flash didn't come from the sky. It came from the ground up, and there was no sound, just the silent, blinding light. Victor stood up and walked over to the window, trying to make something out across the lake. My dad asked what he was looking at, and Victor said he thought he saw something moving out there. It was dark, obviously, but there was enough visibility from the snow on the frozen lake that you could see if you concentrated. So after a few seconds, Victor becomes convinced that there's a person out there. My dad told him that was impossible. There were no houses on that side of the lake. There were no trails, no roads, no anything. It was just pure woods on the other side of the lake. But Victor wasn't having it. He started throwing on his coat and boots, saying he was going to take a look. My dad tried to talk him out of it, but Victor was already halfway down the stairs. My dad grabbed his jacket and followed. The two of them burst out onto the back deck, and that's when they heard a voice. A young voice. It sounded like a little boy yelling help over and over again. My dad said it was faint at first, but unmistakable. There was definitely a child screaming for help somewhere out in that frozen lake. It had been well below freezing for months, so the lake was completely solid, no question about it. My dad said they didn't even think twice. They just started walking across. As they got closer, they could make out a figure standing on the ice, maybe 20 or 30 yards off the far bank. It was small, a kid for sure. My dad said he could see the shape of him against the snow. But then there was another flash. My dad said it was so bright he had to shield his face and drop to his knees. He couldn't see anything for a few seconds. Then when he finally opened his eyes and looked up, the kid was just gone. There was nothing out there but empty ice and snow. My dad said that's when he and Victor went from curious to terrified. They turned around and started racing back toward the house. My dad said he was running as fast as he could without slipping. Victor was a few steps ahead of him when he suddenly yelled and pointed up at the house. He was saying there was someone in the window, but not an adult, a little boy. My dad looked up, but didn't see anything besides the dark glass reflecting the snow. Victor swore up and down that he saw a kid standing right there, looking down at them. My dad didn't know what to say. He just wanted to get inside. They made it back to the house and searched the whole place. Every room, every closet, every corner, but there was no one there. The doors were all locked and the windows were shut. There was no sign that anyone had been inside. They decided to call it a night after that. My dad said neither of them really wanted to talk about what happened. They just went to their rooms and tried to sleep. Neither of them had even noticed midnight come and go. My dad woke up twice that night. Both times, he swore he heard a child laughing somewhere in the house. He lay there in the dark, listening, but it always stopped before he could figure out where it was coming from. The thing that freaked him out the most wasn't the kid on the lake or the figure in the snow. It was the light. That bright, blinding flash that came out of nowhere. He said he and Victor talked about it for years afterward, trying to come up with some kind of explanation. Lightning, a flare, fireworks from some distant town, but nothing made sense. There was simply no source. It just happened twice, and then it was over. They ended up cutting the trip short. My dad said they never talked about that night with my mom or Lisa, not until years afterward at least. My dad still doesn't know what happened out there. He's told me this story maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, and every time he gets to the part about the light, he just kind of trails off. I asked him once if he thought it was something supernatural, and he just shrugged and said he didn't know what else it could have been.
The summer of 2007, when I was 10 years old, the family and I had a trip to Disneyland planned. Our flight was booked for midnight on a Tuesday to save money, and my mom figured my sisters and I would sleep through the flight. My sisters were 8 and 5 at the time. The gatehouse was for the most part empty as we waited for our flight. My mom went to go to the bathroom with my youngest sister, and a minute later my dad told me to wait there and watch my other sister while he went to get a last-minute bite to eat at the cafe, as a middle-aged woman came and sat next to us. She put her hand on my back as she acted all excited to see us and asked where our parents were. I told her they would be right back. Then a middle-aged man came over as well and started acting just as bubbly and affectionate towards us as if he knew us. The man then proclaimed that he just ran into my dad at the cafe and finally introduced himself and the woman as our dad's cousins. My sister and I looked at each other and we both said hello really shyly. The man reached out his hand for my sister to grab, while the woman reached out her hand for me to grab. They told us to follow them because they wanted us to meet their kids. My sister and I naively got up, took their hands, and followed them. The two started leading us out of the gatehouse, past the cafe, down the stairs, and towards the lobby of the airport. When I realized they were leading us to the entrance of the airport, towards the parking lot, I finally asked, "Where are we going?" The woman looked at me through her thick-framed glasses, and with her cheeky smile, said their kids were outside by the car. As we walked outside into the dark parking lot, I looked at my sister and became really uncomfortable. I broke my hand free from the woman and said we wanted to go back inside, while also taking my sister's hand from the man's. I noticed the two looked at each other, their cheeky smiles both gone. The man turned quickly to us and then aggressively wrapped his arms around me as the woman did the same to my sister. They started to literally carry us closer to the parking lot as me and my sister screamed. We heard yelling in the distance from two men who turned out to be airport security. The crazed pair let us go and ran quicker than I'd ever seen anyone run, quickly disappearing into the parking lot. One of the men chased them down, or at least tried to, while the other talked with us for a bit, then led us back into the airport, back to our parents and other sister. It had only been a few minutes and my mom was already sobbing like a baby. Being that I was so young makes this a really weird and uncomfortable memory to think about. It's also weird to think that I didn't see any red flags go off when the two didn't give us their names. It was minutes before boarding my flight to North Carolina for a job interview the next day. It was on a stormy February night. Everyone was bundled up and keeping to themselves. I was sitting in the terminal room waiting for my flight to be called. It wasn't going to be a very busy flight because there weren't many people in the waiting area. Someone sat down 2 seats away from me, which wasn't too weird itself, but also was a bit annoying considering most of the seats were open. But it went from annoying to downright disturbing when I looked at him to see him weirdly staring at me. I looked away and pretended not to care, but I could tell he was still looking at me. Then he leaned over to me and whispered close to my ear that the two men sitting a row across from me were going on the same plane and were planning on kidnapping me once we landed in North Carolina. I didn't know what to say other than, "What?" The heavy man then got up and walked away. At the same time, my flight was called, and I nervously boarded the plane while paying attention to the two men. They sat down ahead of me, and as I walked past them approaching my seat, they both stared me down. At that moment, I started to wonder if that man's warning were true. A few hours later, we arrived to NC, and on my way out of the plane and leaving the airport, I cautiously looked around trying to spot the two men. When I was finally outside in the dark, cold parking lot, I spotted them. The two men were peering their heads at me from around a red minivan, and I guess when they saw me looking in their direction, they hid behind the van. I walked back inside of the airport, waited half an hour, called for a taxi, waited for it to pull up front, and rode to my hotel. So many questions. I don't know who that man was who warned me. I don't know how he knew of those other two men, and I have no idea what they were planning on doing to me, if they were actually looking to kidnap me. So this happened a few months ago. I'm 26. I was at JFK Airport in New York with 5 friends. All of us were about to fly down to Florida to spend the week in a beach house. We had a few more minutes to kill in the airport before we would board our flight, and I really had to go to the bathroom all of a sudden. I was baffled to see a line out the door for the bathroom. I noticed a janitor walking by, so I asked her if there was another bathroom nearby that wouldn't be so crowded. She laughed and told me she shouldn't really be telling people, but there was another bathroom past the door she was pointing at, down a narrow flight of stairs and to the left. I thanked her because she was extremely nice and followed the direction she gave me. Sure enough, behind that door that no one would think to open was a small stairway that led down to a really poorly lit, skinny hallway. It was so narrow that if two people were to pass by each other, one person would have to stand against the wall to make room. I found the bathroom right away. The door was extremely heavy and hard to push. Also, the lights were on inside of the bathroom, and it was filthy in there. It was evident that nobody ever really came in there to clean. Now, this is a little embarrassing to mention, but when I go to the bathroom in public places, I always try to make sure nobody else is around to possibly hear me going. So after checking the stall to see that it was unoccupied, I went back into the hallway for a second to take a look down both directions. To the left, there was somebody standing at the end of the hall, in a dark, unlit section of the hallway. It was a disturbing sight to say the least. All I could do was awkwardly pull my head back into the bathroom and try to pretend we didn't see each other. I went into the stall and just stood there biting my fingers for a minute, dreading the thought of that door opening. And of course, it did. I saw the man's black shoes under the stall door as he walked to the stall next to mine. He shut the door, and then there was silence. No sound of the man unzipping his fly or sitting down, nothing. I realized I didn't really have to go anymore, and went to unlock the stall door. That's when I looked up and saw the man's head peering over the stall, looking at me. I nearly had a heart attack as my screams bounced off the walls of the tiny bathroom. I ran back up those damn steps and out that door, and then casually walked back over to my friends. I was breathing heavily, but nobody seemed to notice. I didn't tell anyone just because it was embarrassing, and I didn't want my friends to make fun of me in any way. I know, I guess that seems stupid now. We went on to have our Florida vacation and all had a good time. Of course, the thought of that creepy man haunted me every night that week. My wife recently took a trip to California with a few of her girlfriends. I was her ride to the airport, and I was therefore her ride back from the airport as well. I waited around in the lobby for a while. Her flight ran a little behind schedule, so it was about 15 minutes late. I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw my wife Michelle and her 4 friends heading over in my direction. Michelle waved happily and ran over to give me a big hug and kiss. I said hello to all of her friends as well. Michelle suddenly started patting her pockets, and a concerned expression appeared on her face. She looked at me and told me she lost her wallet and keys. So Michelle and I, along with one of her friends who was kind enough to help out, all went back up to the terminal and looked everywhere. We asked one of the airport workers to have the plane checked for a wallet and keys. Long story short, we spent a great deal of time looking around the airport to find nothing. She insisted she had both the wallet and keys after she left the plane, though. Eventually, we had to call it quits and went home. A worker assured us that if the items came up, we would be contacted immediately. Michelle was in a sour mood the whole ride home because of it. When we got home, Michelle went up to her room, and I could hear her throw her giant bag onto the bed all the way from downstairs as I was in the kitchen about to make a quick snack for myself. That was when the scream of my wife from upstairs hit me cold in the chest. I ran to our room to see her pointing at the bathroom door. I looked at it and then the 2 closet doors across the room. They'd both been opened, and all of our personal belongings had been thrown all over the floor. Boxes opened with papers that were once in them scattered all over the floor. She stuttered out the words, "There's someone in the bathroom," to me. I felt like my heart stopped in response to those words, but I had to be the man of the house and step up. I tried the doorknob to the bathroom, but of course it was locked. Michelle left the room in a hurry, which I later found out she did to call the cops downstairs. I started ramming at the weak old door with my shoulder, and after 5 solid hits, I busted the door down. Only the bathroom was empty, and the window was jammed completely open, wide enough for someone to squeeze through. I comforted Michelle until the cops arrived, and listening to her description to the cops was bone-chilling. She had just thrown her bag onto the bed, not even having noticed the closets yet, and out of nowhere felt something brush up past her. When she turned, she saw a massively tall man walking to the bathroom, staring at her the whole time with wide eyes and a blank expression. She was only able to get a scream out after the man locked himself into the bathroom. It's safe to say he found my wife's keys and wallet and saw an easy opportunity to break into a house. We had our locks changed the next day and never saw the man again.
This video is sponsored by Scentbird, the only monthly cologne and perfume subscription service out there that I trust. I've been using Scentbird for the better part of a year, and finding new colognes has never been more convenient. Through Scentbird, I found all of my favorite fragrances, and I've never gotten as many compliments on my colognes as I did this past year. Scentbird carries all the top fragrance brands with over 600 perfumes and colognes and a lot of unisex options, and it delivers them right to your door for just $17 a month. With each fragrance, you'll get a 30-day supply, so you can try out fragrances before committing to a full-size bottle. Some of the scents I received this month are African Rooibos by Chris Collins and The Hedonist by Ex Nihilo. Each bottle comes with a card which explains what the fragrance smells like. So African Rooibos has a scent that mixes the aromas of cardamom, tonka bean, orris butter, black pepper, and Rooibos tea accord. The scent is rated by users as a warm, attractive scent perfect for date nights. To help you pick a scent for you, you can also go on their website and take their quiz, which will tell you which scent is the best fragrance for you based on your lifestyle. The quiz takes less than a minute and gives you personalized results based on what you're looking for. If you're interested, scan my QR code and use Nightmare Vids to get 55% off your first month at Scentbird. Very few people experience something so traumatizing at a young age that it sticks with them forever. I'm one of those people. I was maybe 7 or 8 years old. My older brother and I grew up in a broken household. Our mom raised us. Our dad was a deadbeat and disappeared out of our lives. Our mom worked 2 jobs to provide for us. She'd sometimes have to work night shifts, and would usually have our grandma stay at the house on nights that she had to work. My brother Austin is 2 years younger than me. We were fortunate enough to have our own bedrooms given the circumstances. We lived in a small house, but for the 3 of us, and on our mom's dime alone, it wasn't terrible. The area in which we lived wasn't amazing though. It was a night like any other. I can't remember if it was a school night or if it was a weekend. I don't remember any tiny details like that. But what I do remember is I was in the living room with my grandma. She was watching TV and I was playing with Legos on my Lego table. I was being loud and making a mess with them because I remember my grandma kept saying, "Alex, quiet down." Austin was already in bed. My bedtime was 9:30. Given that it was probably approaching that time, I'm guessing this was a weekend night, otherwise my bedtime would have been earlier. The layout of the house was simple. Living room, dining room, and kitchen are all connected. And then there was a hallway which led to the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Our mom's bedroom was at the end of the hall. Mine was in the middle. Our grandma would sleep in our mom's bed when she'd stay over to watch us. Eventually, I had to go to sleep. My grandma would always go to sleep early too, so right after saying goodnight to me, she would go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and stuff before going to sleep as well. I was never one to be afraid of the dark or anything. My mom says I used to be a really brave child. But that night, I woke up in the middle of the night. Something unusual for me because I remember myself being a very heavy sleeper. I heard something outside in the hallway, creaks in the floor. The wood floors in that house were always very creaky. Anytime someone walked down the hall, you'd hear it. I thought my grandma was going to the bathroom. However, the creaking didn't stop. It sounded like the creaks were moving back and forth. I got out of bed and went to the door to listen. Now I heard whispering. I was more confused than anything. I thought my grandma was talking to Austin. I opened the door and looked into the hallway, and what I saw still haunts me. There was a tall, naked, skinny woman leaning on the wall with her head between her arms. She was whispering stuff to herself. And then, like a deer in headlights, her head whipped around to look at me. I screamed for my grandma like a little girl and slammed my door shut. There were pounds on my door, and the woman on the other side was screaming a name. Jeremy, Jeremy, open the door. I kept screaming as loud as I could for my grandma, and I heard her scream in the hallway. What I distinctly remember was my grandma screaming, "Get the fuck out of here." The woman screamed, "Where is Jeremy?" My grandma was in her mid-60s at the time, and she was still pretty quick. She yelled at me to keep my door locked, and she managed to fend off this crazy woman as she also called the police at the same time. I don't know how she did it, but my grandma was one tough woman. The woman left the house screaming Jeremy, and after locking the door, my grandma came to hug both me and Austin, who was awake and also crying from the commotion. We all sat huddled together until the police came. By that time, my grandma told us to just go back to sleep. This simply was a matter of my grandma not locking one of the doors, mixed with living in an already shady area. That woman had to be on crack or something. Seeing what I saw at such a young age did a number on me. I couldn't sleep alone for a long time. It was this incident that really resulted in us moving out of that house not long after. Let me give you some context before the story begins. When I was 19 years old, I lived a pretty normal life. I had just finished high school the year before the story takes place. I had always been one for horror anything, whether it was movies, games, jump scares, you name it, and I loved it. I never seemed to be afraid of anything, and I loved that. It allowed me to go and do things that made me appear tougher to girls who I was interested in at the time or who were interested in me. I thought of it almost like a superpower. My friend had always talked about this REM-induced real-life nightmare called sleep paralysis. I, however, had never experienced such a thing. My friend Megan suffered from extreme lucid dreaming. She explained to me several times about how certain stimulators or outside factors could play into her dreams and mold them into what could potentially be a heavenly experience full of fun and wonder, or it could just as easily turn into a bone-chilling nightmare straight out of hell. Being the light sleeper I am, I saw no chance of it occurring, so I kind of just let it go right over my head. One night, Megan texted me and asked me to come over, as she had just suffered another so-called evil experience due to her sleep condition. When I arrived, I found her asleep again, seemingly peacefully. I took a seat on her stool that she had for her makeup dresser right by the window and started playing a game on my phone. 30 minutes or so went by, and I figured she was peacefully asleep and it would probably be okay for me to leave as long as I let her know that I stopped by as she requested. But suddenly, Megan awoke and started screaming. This was a different kind of scream though, a type of scream I had never heard before, especially from her. It was almost mumbled, I don't know how else to describe it. Her eyes bulged open, and I ran over to her side. I asked her if she was having a bad dream. She started shaking. I grabbed a hold of her to try to calm her down, but the tremors grew. I asked her what was going on, but no response. I figured this was just another one of her so-called sleep paralysis episodes. I did my best to comfort her. After about 30 or so seconds went by, she regained full control of her body. I made sure she was okay, and I left back for my house, as it was almost 1 in the morning. Right as I got home, I received a very panicked text reading, "The hallucinations won't stop." I asked her to clarify what she meant, but no response. After about 30 minutes went by, I took it upon myself to head back over to her place. When I arrived, I noticed the illumination of red and blue covering her front porch and the surrounding road signs. I ran up to her house, desperately trying to find out what happened. As I approached the house, I noticed Megan was speaking with one of the officers on the scene. When I went up to talk to her, Megan and the officer walked me over to a more secluded area. What I found out still sends chills up my spine to this day. Apparently when I had went over to Megan's that night, she wasn't asleep at all. She was pretending to be. Evidently right behind me was a tall, skinny, homeless man hiding in her closet. The police had also found a very large kitchen knife on him as well. The theory to this day is Megan thought she was having an episode, when in reality, this very real man was quietly creeping towards her in her bedroom. Supposedly, when I had entered her house, it was enough to spook the man into hiding, and my presence was enough to keep him hidden. This gave Megan the time to call 911 and report the situation, which in turn resulted in the police arriving almost immediately after I had left. Thankfully, the man was taken into custody rather quickly. To this day, I don't know what to think about that night, other than I could have very easily saved her life simply by keeping her company during what I thought was a very stressful situation, which in turn could have resulted in some very scary and heinous acts that would have taken place if I had been there any later. I hope I never experienced such a thing. That would be what finally trips my fear factor, without a doubt. Around 10 years ago, I moved out of my mom's house into my first apartment in the city of Chicago. The place was a nice 3-bedroom apartment on the south side of the city in a friendly neighborhood by the University of Illinois. I lived with 2 roommates, Tom and Mike. Mike was a good friend of mine, while Tom was a good friend of Mike's, who I had not met prior, although we ended up getting along just fine. One night about a month after moving in, I met up with a few friends of mine for drinks at a bar more in the center of the city, around 10 minutes from my place. It was a good time, and I ended up getting slightly drunk before getting into a cab at 1 a.m. and heading home. Upon walking into my apartment, I noticed that Tom's door was open, showing that he was staying at his girlfriend's place, while Mike's door was closed with the light from his TV shining underneath the crack. I made my way to my bedroom and put on my own TV before lying down to prepare for sleep. After around 10 minutes, I heard my doorbell ring. Half asleep, I woke up confused as it was 1:30 in the morning, so I ignored it. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang again, and then again a few seconds after that. It's important to mention that my roommate Mike had a good amount of side cash by dealing weed to a few people. He was also a huge stoner himself, so the idea that he fell asleep while waiting for a late-night customer to come over was not out of the realm of possibility. With this in mind, I went over to my intercom and asked who was there. A girl's voice answered back, "It's Emma, I'm here to see Mike." Thinking that my suspicions had been confirmed, I exited out of my front door and headed down the stairs. The door to the outside of our apartment building was made of tall glass, so you could easily identify any potential visitors. Here, I saw an attractive, college-age blonde girl with glasses waiting patiently outside. I had never seen this person before, however, she appeared to be non-threatening, and besides having random customers over to grab weed, Mike would also have some random girls over to hook up with from time to time. Because of this, I let my guard down slightly and cracked the door open. The girl then repeated what she had said moments earlier over the intercom. "Hi, I'm here to see Mike." I replied, "Okay, he's here, just follow me up," and I held the door open for her. She grabbed the handle, and I turned around to head back up the stairs. As I was walking back up, I quickly noticed that this Emma girl was not following me up. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that she was still standing outside holding the door open, only now she was staring off to her right, almost as if waiting for someone. At this moment, a tidal wave of fear crashed over me as I realized something horrible was more than likely about to happen. I continued walking up to my place, quicker now. After turning the corner of the stairs, I heard the door swing open and then heavy footsteps running up the stairs behind me. I looked over my shoulder again, and what I saw shook me to my core. A tall, gangly man with sunken-in eyes, greasy long hair down to his shoulders, was running up the stairs straight at me. He was wearing a sleeveless black t-shirt, and apart from the cheap-looking tribal tattoos I saw creeping up his arms, I noticed he was also holding what looked like a lead pipe in his right hand. At this moment, my body shot full of adrenaline as I turned around and raced back up the stairs and into my apartment. I stood facing the now closed door, paralyzed as the man hit the door 3 more times while shouting obscenities at me. He eventually gave up and ran down the stairs and out the front. Instead of going down to let her in himself, Mike buzzed her up after just hearing her name, with his train of thought being him thinking that she was a friend of mine. When she reached the door to our unit, he opened it and let her in. He said it seemed like she was confused, mentioning that she was looking for someone named Tim. Mike responded by saying his own name, and that no one named Tim lived here. He mentioned she stayed near the entrance of the unit and kept reaching behind her to make sure the door stayed open before leaving only a few moments later. After hearing this, my theory is that these same people came earlier in the day, and not expecting to have someone just let them up through the buzzer, the girl made the mistake of forgetting to keep the door to the building open, rendering the attacker unable to enter during this first attempt. Either way, we both got extremely lucky that night. We did call the police, who arrived and asked for more information about what happened. They asked if there was anyone we knew who might want to do us harm, and we answered no, which was the truth, as this seemed to be a completely random attack. The cops left soon after, saying that there was nothing much they could do. We never saw that Emma girl or her scumbag partner again. This story happened to me 4 years ago when I was in my mid-20s. This whole experience will probably scar me for life, and it's still vividly imprinted in my mind. The day was the 15th of June, and I had the house to myself because my parents were on a 2-week vacation in France. It was sometime after dusk, probably around 8 p.m., and the weather was scorchingly hot. Believe me when I say I was sweating my ass off with just my tank top and shorts on. The heat was so unbearable that I allowed in some fresh air, opening all the living room and bedroom windows, planning on closing them right before hitting the hay. Now, before fast forwarding, I must mention that I was feeling extremely exhausted. On that same day, I had taken 3 exams in the morning and played a volleyball match in the afternoon. Thus, once I ate my dinner, while browsing social media in my room, I collapsed into bed without even realizing. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the muffled sounds of thunderbolts and a draft of cold, fresh air hitting my face. A strong wind was blowing, and all of the shutters left open were noisily banging. Still drowsy, I flicked on the lamp, but the light wouldn't turn on. I checked the plug using my phone flashlight, but everything was fine. I begrudgingly climbed out of bed and looked out my bedroom window. There were menacing, rainy black clouds in the horizon. A typical late-night summer storm was approaching. Given that every lamppost in the street was off, I instantly knew there had been a blackout. Phone flashlight in hand, I dizzily headed down the hallway to shut the windows closed before rain started pouring down. When I got to the last window, though, I noticed the mosquito net lifted up. This struck me as weird, since I was quite positive I hadn't left it that way. Getting a little paranoid, I turned behind me to shine the flashlight around the living room and check my surroundings. The furniture was still in place. No drawers or closet doors left open, no decorative objects missing or moved in unfamiliar positions. Everything seemed normal. I briefly peeked my head out of my window to look outside. Trees swaying in the howling wind, leaves shaking in a frenzy. Powerful display of nature's force, but still nothing remotely suspicious. Maybe the mechanism is faulty or the strong wind somehow pushed it up. Against my better judgment, I convinced myself it was useless to lose sleep over it. Feeling relieved, I closed the shutters and started walking back to my bedroom, eager to get a decent night's rest. Little did I know that night would be anything but pleasant. I happened to casually turn my head to the flight of stairs connected to the attic, when a vivid burst of light flashing from up there caught my eyes. I paid it no mind. The attic was adorned with huge glass windows, so it was no wonder to see light spreading across the room. It was probably a sheet lightning. I kept walking, subconsciously waiting for the thunder to come. But it never did. I stopped in my tracks. Given that the flash I saw was powerful and bright, the lightning had to be pretty close. So why couldn't any rumbling noise be heard? I started to think, maybe it wasn't lightning. What if it was a flashlight? As doubt crept in, my heart began to race. I quickly put 2 and 2 together, and now the strange occurrence of the mosquito net left up made much more sense. The nightmarish realization hit me that an intruder could have broken into my house. At first, I panicked. Did they hear me shutting the windows? Were they carrying any weapons? Did they plan on just robbing my house? Or did they also have worse intentions? Normally I would call my parents to deal with it, but since they were away, it was all on me now. While those sickening thoughts were swirling in my mind, the distinct sound of a doorknob being twisted and turned made me instantly snap out of my catatonic state. I shot my head to face the living room entrance, and through the glass frame, I spotted a shadowy figure just a few inches outside of the front door. There was a person standing there, most likely an accomplice of the guy upstairs. Words are not enough to describe how powerless and defenseless I felt. Despite the overwhelming fear, I did my best to keep my cool. Trying to make as little noise as possible, I tiptoed in the direction of the stairs leading down to the basement, which was directly connected to the garage. I figured I could safely escape from there. While I was making my descent down, still using my phone as a source of light, I dialed 911, and speaking as softly as possible, I informed the operator about what just happened. He tried to calm me down and reassured me that the police would be there in less than 10 minutes. He also added I should lock myself in a safe room and wait for the officers to show up. I was about to reply that I could easily sneak outside through the garage door, when all of a sudden I lost the call. I immediately checked the phone and realized that down there I had no signal. As if it wasn't enough, I also noticed the battery was almost dead. Once I reached the basement, I nervously assessed what to do. I could try and find an emergency flashlight, but now I was so close to escaping from the house that I didn't want to waste time rummaging through the drawers. Besides, I was mindful that the intruders upstairs could have heard me, so in the heat of the moment, I exited the basement as fast as I could. Nonetheless, while making my way towards the garage door, I got a feeling in my gut telling me I was being watched. I don't even know why. Maybe my sixth sense had picked up on something. But I pointed my phone to illuminate the back seats of my car, and there he was. A man's face stuck to the rearview mirror. A disgusting, revolting face with dead, bulgingly wide eyes and a malicious, yellowish grin spreading across its cheeks. He kept staring at me, so intently it almost looked like he was piercing into my soul. He slid his dirty hand against the glass, waving me hello in an unnatural slow motion. And at that point, it happened. My phone battery died, turning off the flashlight and leaving me in the middle of a total darkness. I felt my heart in my throat. I had never been more scared in my entire life. My whole body was quivering and shaking in fear. When I heard the car door opening, I lost it. I screamed. I screamed like a little girl as I somehow managed to unlock the garage door and bolt outside, climbing up the driveway ramp. By that time, heavy rain had started pouring down. I hopped over the gate and ran to the nearest house, yelling like a lunatic for the neighbors to rush outside. They came out in shock, and I explained to them the whole situation, almost out of breath and soaking wet. In the meantime, I heard sirens in the distance. 2 police cars rolled down the street, and I practically ran into the officer's arms, screaming that there were 3 strangers in my house. 4 agents went into my house, guns drawn, while another one took my description of the events. Those 3 men were all gone, though. And to this day, I don't think they've ever been caught. Some antiques which held some value were stolen. However, I must say it was no big deal for my family. For the remainder of the night, I couldn't sleep at all. I kept tossing and turning, jumping at the slightest sounds, ruminating relentlessly on the horrific experience. But I kid you not, another chilling surprise was lying in wait. When morning came, I spotted a small piece of paper sticking out of the edge of my bed. I picked it up and went frozen stiff. The following words were written. "Bye-bye, beauty. You look cute when you sleep." I used to travel a lot for work, and most of the time I stayed in cheap but decent hotels because I didn't care about anything except having a bed and a shower. Nothing scary ever happened to me in any hotel before, so I never thought about danger or weird people. That changed during a trip I took for a training event in a small city in Pennsylvania. I checked into a regular-looking hotel that had a small lobby with old, depressing red carpet and a smell that reminded me of my grandma's house. The woman at the front desk gave me a room key, and I went up to my room on the 3rd floor. The hallway was very quiet and felt a little empty in a strange way. My room was pretty normal with a small bed, a desk, and a bathroom. I threw my bag on the bed, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. I was tired from driving for hours, so after showering and watching TV for a bit, I tried to fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something sliding on the floor. At first I thought it was the ice machine or some noise from the hallway. I was half asleep and did not want to get up, but then I heard the soft sliding sound again. And this time it was right by the door. I turned on the lamp and looked at the door. Something small and white was sticking out from underneath. I got up slowly and picked it up. It was a folded piece of paper. There was handwriting inside, very messy and uneven. It was only a few words, telling me that someone was watching me from somewhere inside the hotel. My heart started beating harder because I had no idea who could have written that. I didn't hear any footsteps after the note appeared, and the hallway had been dead silent. I stood in the middle of my room, feeling unsure if I should open the door or stay inside. I decided to lock the chain lock and sit on the bed with my back against the wall. I kept the lamp on so the room would not be so dark. I felt too awake to sleep now. About 20 minutes passed before I heard the sliding sound again. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting to see what would happen. Another small piece of paper slid through slowly, like someone was gently pushing it with one finger. I walked up to it and picked it up. The second note said something even stranger. It said that person had been inside my room earlier in the day before I arrived, and they liked watching people sleep in this hotel. The handwriting looked shakier than the first note. I felt a wave of fear go through my chest, because the idea that someone had been inside my room was too real to ignore. I looked around the room, even though I knew no one was in there right now. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain, even though I already knew it was empty. After checking everything, I sat on the bed again, trying to decide if I should call the front desk, but it was after 2 a.m., and I had this paranoid feeling that the person sending the notes might be someone who worked at the hotel. The handwriting looked strange and shaky, maybe like an older person or someone who was unstable. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe this was some prank, but it felt too personal. I sat still for another half hour and tried to listen for any sound. Every tiny noise made my body tense up. Even the air conditioner clicking or the pipes tapping, everything made me jump. I told myself that if a third note came, I would go straight downstairs. I would not wait any longer. I kept my eyes on the door, but forced myself to breathe slowly. After a long period of silence, I started to relax again. But then, the third note came. The sliding sound was even slower this time, like the person wanted me to hear it. I walked up to the door again. The third note said something completely different from the first two. It said the person was already inside the room with me again. I stared at the words for a long time. I looked around the room again, even though I had checked everything before. I slowly turned in a full circle, expecting to see someone in the corner or behind the curtains. I couldn't even breathe normally now. The idea of someone hiding in the room with me made my chest feel tight. I grabbed my bag and made the decision to get out immediately. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlatched the chain lock and opened the door quickly. I rushed out and slammed it behind me, then ran down the hallway trying to stay quiet but also wanting to get as far from that room as possible. When I reached the stairs, I looked back only once. At the far end of the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the corner near the last room. It looked like someone stepping back out of sight. I hurried downstairs to the front desk where a different employee was working. He looked half asleep, but when I told him what happened, he looked extremely confused. He said there were only 3 other guests on my floor, and none of them had been walking around. He offered to give me a new room or let me check out early. I decided to check out early and drive to a different hotel, even though it was after 3 a.m. Before leaving, I asked if someone could check my room to see if any windows were open or if anything was disturbed. He took me upstairs with a master key, and when we entered my room, everything looked normal. but the window lock was broken in a way that looked recent. The employee looked nervous and said maybe someone from outside had gotten in earlier. I grabbed my bag and left the moment he finished talking. I drove to a different hotel 20 minutes away and barely slept. The next morning, I called the original hotel to see if they had found anything else. They said nothing strange came up. No cameras caught anyone near my room. No other guests complained about anything. They made it seem like the whole thing was just a weird misunderstanding, but I didn't buy it. I think he was lying. Something strange was going on in that hotel. I still remember the feeling that someone was right outside my door watching me. And the worst part is I keep thinking about the third note saying the person was inside the room again. That's the part that doesn't make sense and made me question if it was maybe a prank, but the broken window latch said otherwise. I checked everywhere. There was no one. The window latch being broken makes me think that the person might have been coming and going before I ever realized anything was happening. I never went anywhere near that hotel again. I stayed at a hotel in Virginia during a long drive to visit family because I was too tired to keep going. It was late at night, almost midnight, and the hotel looked basic but clean. The parking lot had only a few cars, and most of the building looked dark from the outside. When I walked into the lobby, the man at the front desk barely looked up. He gave me my key and I went to the third floor. Most of the lights were dim, and every door I passed had the Do Not Disturb sign hanging. Like no one wanted to be bothered. Definitely the type of hotel that people stay at out of necessity only. My room was at the end of the hallway. When I opened the door, the room looked fine, but a little messy in a way I couldn't explain. Like the lamp was tilted, one of the drawers to the dresser was slightly open, the blanket on the bed had a small wrinkle near the corner, as if someone sat there recently. It looked like housekeeping rushed or simply just did not care. I dropped my bag on the chair, turned on the TV, and got ready for bed. I got into bed and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about how messy the room was when I came in. The more I thought about it, the more weird it seemed. I remembered that the front desk man didn't even mention housekeeping when he checked me in, and the whole hotel felt too empty, but I forced myself to ignore it and finally drifted off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning slowly. It was such a faint sound at first that I thought maybe the air conditioner made it, but then the handle clicked lightly again, like someone trying to test the lock without waking me. I stared at the door. The room was dark except for the glow from the TV, which I had forgotten to turn off. I could see the shadow of the door handle move slightly. Someone was outside trying to open it. After a few seconds, the handle stopped moving. I stayed still, waiting for another noise. Then the sound came again, but it was different. It was a small metal scraping against the lock. It sounded like someone sliding a key into the keyhole. But that didn't make sense because no one should have a key to my room besides staff. The key turned, but the door never opened. I could see a thin sliver of hallway light in the gap. The door pushed gently once, then stopped. I waited for a voice or footsteps, but there was nothing. Then the door closed softly again, like the person walked away. I stayed awake for almost an hour, listening for footsteps or any sound in the hall. When nothing happened, I convinced myself it was maybe a staff member who mixed up room numbers, and when they realized, they left. I went to relock the door, then I fell asleep again from exhaustion. Fast forward to like 2:15 a.m., and I remember that specifically. I woke again to something that at first I wasn't sure what it was. All I know is I heard the slightest rustling sounds in the room, and I knew someone was in there with me. I was scared to sit up and look, but I did. And then the rustling stopped. I noticed even in the darkness of the room, the slightest sight of a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dark, hovering over my bag in the corner of the room. I said in a panicked, shaky voice, "Who is that?" And a deep man's voice responded, "It's housekeeping. Sorry, I'll leave now." I didn't even respond. I was so shook, but I saw the black mass move from my bag to the door, and then the door opened and closed. I immediately flicked on the light and rushed to the door to put on the chain lock. I went to my bag and saw that it had clearly been gone through. I had to gather myself for a few minutes before calling the front desk. I told them someone with a key just broke into my room and was going through my stuff. The front desk person said that no housekeeping staff was currently there. I packed all my stuff and rushed to the little lobby where I called the police and demanded they check the video surveillance footage. When police arrived, that's when the desk worker agreed to show the surveillance footage, and it showed a large, scary-looking man repeatedly walking down the halls all sketchy-like, going to my door multiple times, and then finally entering my room with a key. The man at the front desk said that the man didn't work there, and he must have somehow stolen a master key from the hotel. I got my money back and immediately fled from that hotel, driving another half hour and eventually sleeping in my car. This experience somewhat permanently tainted my opinion of hotels, unfortunately. I wonder if I could have pressed charges on the hotel for negligence or endangering a guest, or anything like that really, but I never bothered. I just try to block it out now. I used to work night shifts for a small delivery company, so on my off days I would take short weekend trips alone just to get out of the house. During one of these trips, I stayed at a cheap hotel in New Jersey because it was close to a hiking trail I wanted to check out the next morning. The hotel wasn't terrible, but it had that old smell, and the hallways were too quiet, like no one else was staying there. I checked in during the early evening, and the woman at the front desk told me housekeeping had already cleaned all the rooms for the night. I didn't think about that detail until later when everything unfolded. My room was on the second floor, and the hallway light flickered when I walked to my door. I didn't pay much mind to how creepy the hotel was because I was just so tired. I wanted to eat, shower, and go to sleep. The room looked clean at first glance. The sheets were tucked in perfectly, but the pillow on the chair looked a little crooked. I fixed it without thinking and turned on the small TV. After relaxing for a bit and eating snacks, I got in the shower. When I came out, the bathroom mirror was foggy and the room felt colder than before. I brushed it off and got into bed. The room had a dark corner near the small closet, and I kept noticing it out of the corner of my eye. It made me feel like someone was standing there, even though I knew it was empty. I fell asleep eventually, but I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard a strange, soft noise. It sounded like something sliding on the carpet in the corner of the room. I opened my eyes slowly and listened. The room was dim because the curtains were thin and some light from the parking lot came through. I thought maybe I was imagining things because I was still half asleep. Then I heard a quiet breathing sound, not mine, and it was coming from near the closet. I stayed completely still because I got scared instantly. The breathing was slow, like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling. I told myself it had to be the air conditioner, but the unit was on the other side of the room, and it made a totally different sound. I didn't want to sit up because I was afraid of what I might see, but eventually I forced myself to. I slowly pushed myself up on my elbows and looked toward the closet. I couldn't see anything at first, it was just a dark corner. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The closet door, which I knew I had left completely open after checking it earlier, was now slightly closed. Not fully, but enough that it looked touched. I stared at the gap and tried to listen. The breathing stopped the second I sat up, and that made me even more scared because it meant something or someone realized I was awake. I wanted to run out of the room, but I was frozen in place. After a minute of silence, I got up very slowly and walked backward toward the door while keeping my eyes on the closet. I reached for the doorknob, turned it carefully, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty and felt even quieter than before. My heart was beating so fast I felt lightheaded. I went downstairs to the front desk, but no one was there. The desk phone was ringing like someone called the hotel, but no one picked up. I didn't know if I should wait or try to find someone else. I didn't want to go back upstairs alone. After a few minutes, the woman who worked the front desk finally came out of the back room looking tired. I told her someone was in my room. She looked confused and said housekeeping was gone for the night, and no one else had keys to guest rooms except for her and one older housekeeper who left hours ago. She offered to check the room with me or move to another, but she seemed so calm that it made me doubt myself a little. I asked her to come with me back to the room just to check. We went upstairs together. I expected to see the closet wide open or something messed up, but when we entered the room, everything looked normal. The closet was fully open again. The pillow on the chair was straight. Nothing seemed touched, even though I knew something had changed earlier. The woman checked behind the curtains and in the bathroom and under the bed, and she found nothing. She said maybe I had a nightmare or woke up confused, and honestly this kind of offended me, but I didn't want to argue with her because I was tired and embarrassed, so I decided to switch to another room down the hall. She gave me a different key and left me alone. I moved my stuff to the new room quickly and locked the door. I checked every corner twice before lying down again. I tried to sleep, but the fear kept my eyes open. It was only around 1 a.m. and the night felt never-ending. I kept listening for anything strange. After about an hour, I finally started drifting off when I heard something that made my entire body turn cold. It was the sound of a housekeeping cart rolling down the hallway very slowly. The squeaky wheels echoed down the hall. The problem was that it was way past housekeeping hours, and the woman at the front desk said no one else was working. I sat up in bed and listened. The cart's wheels stopped right outside my new door. I didn't move. I held my breath for a bit so I could listen. Then I heard something worse. I heard someone else breathing right outside the door, and it sounded exactly like the heavy, slow breathing I heard from inside the first room. It went on for almost a full minute. I wanted to run or call someone, but my phone was across the room on the desk and I was too scared to move. Then I heard a gentle knocking sound. Not with knuckles, but like someone pressing their palm against the door softly. They were feeling the door, not knocking. Eventually the breathing stopped and the wheels squeaked again as the cart was pushed slowly down the hallway. I got up after a few minutes and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. The cart was gone too. I checked my phone and thought about calling the front desk again, but I felt like they would think I was crazy. I locked the chain on the door, pushed the chair against it, and sat awake for hours. I kept thinking about the first room and the breathing. I tried to convince myself it was just someone on my floor messing around. Early in the morning around sunrise, I finally left the room and went downstairs to check out. The woman at the desk was gone, and a man was there instead. I told him what happened, and he gave me a strange look. Then he said something that disturbs me to this day. He said they had not had a housekeeper on staff for the last week because the woman who used to work nights just stopped coming in. He explained that either he or whoever else was on front desk duty would have to clean the rooms in the meantime. He seems like there was something he was hiding from me to save face for the hotel. I asked him if the missing housekeeper had keys to the rooms, and he said yes, she did. I left immediately after and did not look back at the hotel. I kept thinking about how that woman at the desk said housekeeping had already been through all the rooms earlier that evening, even though no one had been hired for a week. I don't know if she made that up or if she actually thought the missing woman had done it, but the breathing I heard in the room and outside my door sounded too real, and the way the closet door moved on its own still makes me feel sick. I think someone had been hiding inside that room before I ever arrived. I think they were still hiding somewhere in the hotel while I slept. I work as a house person at a hotel. It's a mix of maintenance and housekeeping. My job is to mostly help the front desk, which mainly involves me fixing guests' appliances and bringing them supplies. Another one of my jobs is to keep our pool clean and stashed with towels, which is relevant to the story I'm about to share. This took place in summer of 2023. My boss hired a new front desk worker, which for privacy reasons, I'll call her Brianna. She was working the night shifts, so I had a schedule change to help her on nights. It was a Wednesday night, so for our hotel, means it was a dead night, basically no check-ins. Me and Brianna mostly just chatted for the night while we did our stuff, which led to me going to our pool. For a guest here, if you wanted to go swimming, you had to fill out a form which basically gives you all the rules, and you'll be handed a pool key. Our managers gave us employees master keys that can get you into basically anything in the hotel. I clicked the key onto the lock and the pool door unlocked, allowing me to head in. The pool has a storage room which we stash towels and also other stuff like chlorine and whatnot. I opened the storage room and grabbed towels, since I saw there was little to none on the rack. As I was bending down to grab one more towel, I heard something hit the water. I actually jumped because it startled the hell out of me, and it caused me to drop the towels. I rushed out back to the pool area and saw one of our lifesavers floating on top of the water. It was so bizarre because there was no way this lifesaver could have been in the water without having been tossed into the pool. I looked around the pool to see if someone had entered, but there was no one in here except for me. I pulled in the lifesaver out of the pool and quickly got back to putting towels out and left. I was weirded out for sure. I asked Brianna, who was at the front desk, if anyone went to the pool, and of course she said no. I didn't want to bring up the weird incident that happened since she was new and I wanted to give her a good impression of not sounding delusional. The night went on and nothing happened until around 9:30 p.m. I grabbed a maintenance slip and read what the problem was. Room 324's toilet wasn't working. I trotted my way up to room 324 and let myself in with the key. When you open the door, immediately to the right is the bathroom. If you walk straight past the bathroom, you'll find 2 beds on the right side of the room. I headed right towards the toilet and lifted the lid up to fix it. There was no one in the room since Brianna told me the guest wasn't arriving until Friday. While I was adjusting the valves and flapper inside of the toilet to see what wasn't working, I felt the temperature all of a sudden drop. I stopped what I was doing and stood there, feeling the hairs on my arms slowly raising up. What the hell? I said in my head as I looked at all the vents that could possibly be letting cold air in. Then I realized there could be no cold air. It was a summer night, a warm summer night to be specific. So what the hell could make the temperature just drop? As soon as I had this thought, I felt the air return to normal, and my hairs went back down. I checked the thermostat in the room, and it read 68 degrees. This put me more on edge now, since I hadn't forgotten the pool incident. I wanted to fix the toilet and get out of here, so I went back into the bathroom and back to fixing the toilet. It felt like 2 minutes went by, because I heard the toilet start to flush again. I sighed out of relief, and watched the water in the tank rise back up. When over the sound of the water, there was an audibly loud thump coming from somewhere outside the bathroom. I froze in place, and then that all too familiar cold feeling coming back. My heart started to race as my mind started to race at what could have made that noise. I put the lid back on top of the toilet and made my way out of the bathroom. I turned my head right to face the 2 beds and saw the room phone on the nightstand dangling. However, I wasn't paying attention to the phone dangling. I was paying attention to what I saw past the phone. In the corner of the room, right next to the bed, there was a really tall person standing still as ever. I felt myself struggling to breathe with what I was looking at. I was frozen stiff in the doorway of the bathroom. I couldn't see any features on this person. It was just this completely black figure in the dim room, like a character outline when you unlock them in a fighting game. It stood so still I couldn't hear any noise emit from it. Then, I swear to God, he, she, it, whatever, moved. I don't know which limb moved, but all I know is I saw this figure move. I practically bolted for the main door, flinging it open so fast I almost smacked myself in the face. I closed the door and rushed back down to the first floor where Brianna was at the front desk. I told her that I was punching out, and we said our farewells for the night. While driving home, I was wrapped in my head, trying to figure out what just happened to me. I connected the pool incident to the room incident. I had no idea what that thing was in my room. And yes, I say thing now because I realized that couldn't be any human I know, and how I couldn't read a single feature of it. It was enough for me to get out of there. I like to think my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I have no way of knowing for sure. Nothing weird like this has happened to me since, which I'm thankful for, because that was the scariest night of my life.